Hello and welcome to the Friday Morning Nameless. Today I would like to present a series of simplified propositions to put into practice. Presumably my perception is that some of us have painstakingly operated on principles of prejudice. This is problematic. Please, proceed and practice these procedural practices to gain a much-needed new perspective through participation. 1. Find a partner to express accountability with. 2. Pray to whatever God will listen. 3. Find yourself in the characters of literature, preferably spiritual literature, hence probably all literature. 4. Identify yourself in the opposition. 5. Offer your inadequacies to the God that will listen, seek guidance in such matters. 6. Be merciful. 7. Be gracious. 8. Self-sacrifice is a must, as well as 6 and 7. 9. You are not God. 10. You are an agent for God, like it or not. 11. Repeat 1 through 11. Lastly, consider this. If you stare into the abyss, consider what the abyss considers the abyss. Who does the king bend the knee to? Thank you very much, and remember, this little corner of the internet does not exist.
And whoosh. Oh, okay.
The rhinoceros is a unicorn. I don't know what to tell you.
That's the way we're gonna deal with this.
Or is that I don't know what to tell you.
No.
And I don't know what to tell you.
Oh, okay. Okay, so a lot of people listening, but blah 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 blah.
No.
Whoosh, it comes out. Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Is that okay? Does that help you?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
No.
Whoosh.
Sorry.
No.
Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
No.
I don't know what to tell you, man.
No. That's a miss.
Sorry.
The whoosh. Oh, okay.
No.
I don't know what to tell you.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Whoosh.
No. That was excellent. No.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Whoosh. That's true. That's so true. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
No. It's just an inversion. No.
Oh, okay. Then you begin to learn. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
I don't know. I don't mean that.
I don't know what to tell you.
No. I didn't. No.
Whoosh. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
No.
What to tell you? I don't know what to tell you. It's like I don't know what to tell you.
Whoosh. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So, oh, okay. Oh, okay.
No.
You know, it's.
Yeah. No. I think that's right. No.
Yeah. I don't know what to tell you, man. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you, bro.
Whoosh. And there's this whoosh. And I want to know what the whoosh is about.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. I watched the video and it just seemed to be, oh, okay.
Are you sick and tired of being asked about the TLC? When you look at this corner, do you not even think that it's a thing? Well, if you're like me, raise your hand. Because I got what you need. You need Telos tea. That's right. Grab yourself a nice hot cup of Telos tea. Not Telos tea. It's not a thing.
The Friday Morning Rando. Greetings and welcome to the Friday Morning Nameless. I'm Chad the Alcoholic, and today is a very special show. This is the possibly going to break the interweb. It's possible that it could break the interweb. This might just be the greatest show that ever happened on the internet. Now, I don't know if it'll actually happen. It's possible that it might happen. I gotta tell you, it might happen. It might not happen. I don't know. It could be the greatest show that ever happened on the internet. possibly 100 people to watch it, maybe 4 or 5 more than that. I'm not sure. So, everybody, I'd like you to say hello to Tony, a.k.a. Dad. Say, hi, Dad. Hi, Dad.
Hey, y'all.
And,
How's it going, Chad?
It's this is very exciting. You are the only person other than my wife and my family to have any knowledge really of what's going on with me in my basement.
Well, you're one of the only people in the whole wide world that knows what's going on with me in my closet.
Oh. Boy, let's just let that linger.
I haven't come out yet. Okay.
Yeah. Oh boy. I bet you when you do, you'll bring all those stars and stripes with you, though.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Okay, well, so I got to tell you, Dad, there's this show that I've been recording for a while now, probably since the end of December. I've had several episodes, and the show is called the Friday Morning Randos. And what randos typically are people, unlike yourself, they're normally people I never met, people I've not really talked to, and people that have contacted me to tell their story. Now, everything about this is the opposite. I, in fact, have contacted you to tell your story. I do know you. I've spent lots of time with you. And
yeah.
I mean, not in this form. This is kind of strange. I understand. And I'm going to ask you about this later. What's it like to talk to a dude in a wrestling mask? Because that's got to be kind of strange.
We'll have to cross that bridge at another time. Yes.
Yes. So what I generally do for the Randos show is
hence the name.
Yes.
Right. Even though we're kind of inverted from that today, it's all good. Let's just have fun with it.
That's right. And so you are a genuine rando to anybody that is watching this, other than possibly Upcycle. I know Upcycle was a early
participant. Yeah, real cool. I post them, have them on the front of my page because I'm so appreciative of their support. They've been great.
Yeah, and Neutrino and those guys were early
followers.
Yeah, followers of the old Sarge TJ Albin.
Yeah.
Which we will get to at some point.
Yeah, I was going to say who's currently busy on another mission.
That's correct. So and a part of this also is just to fill you in a little bit is I've been talking to these people on the internet for roughly 3 or 4 years.
I was going to say a while now.
And we talked about all sorts of stuff, and it's a fellowship of folks, a collective of dorks and interesting, smart folks that I really enjoy talking with. And
I resemble those remarks.
Yes, exactly. I knew you would. And so, welcome to this little corner of the internet where we have many different conversations.
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. Yeah. It's fun. This is good stuff. Never done this before. I've never been interviewed before, so it's kind of an interesting dynamic. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, on the upside, you are a storyteller. So that will be I think this should work out in your favor. And what I like to do with the randos is I like to hear people tell their story about their lives and what they were like. What was the home like they grew up in? What was it like in school for them?
Sure.
What was their relationship with their parents? How did and go as deep as you'd like to go. There's only a very few amount of people who will watch this, so don't worry about being embarrassed.
I'm not. You know me. I don't get embarrassed. It's just the way I see it. You just got to be who you are and keep it real. So, and if folks are interested in that, they'll listen. If not, that's fine too. I know I'm not that interesting of a character, so it's all good.
Well,
okay. So my story. All right. Wow. Well, first of all, let me start by saying I just turned 60 a short while ago, so we're going back a few years. But my earliest memories are still to this day are of my years living in Santa Clara with my parents, and I was 3 years old, 4 years old at the time. So that's as far back as my memory goes. Beyond that, I have no recollection. But just your average American family. It was back in the days when one parent worked and the other stayed home and took care of the children. And so my dad was a police officer and a fireman. So he was actually referred to as a public safety officer, but he did both. And anyway, so shortly thereafter, I can remember my father coming up to the front door of our house in Santa Clara. Now I'm still 4 years old here. And he knocks on the door, and my mom says, "Go answer the door." And so I run up to the door and I open it, and on the other side, my father is standing there, and he's got on a pair of these, Groucho Marx glasses with the mustache, right? And he says, "Pack your stuff, we're moving." And that's how I found out that we were moving on from there. But and the interesting thing was my wife and I were chatting, and she reminded me of this imaginary friend that I had when I lived at that house at the age of 3 and 4 years old. And so just in the last few days, we had this conversation and reflecting on that, I can recall having this guy, his name was Sarge, and he looked like your typical World War II sergeant, probably something that I'd created from the movies that were on at the time or whatnot. But anyway, so I used to play in the backyard with this guy, Sarge. And the reason that interestingly enough, the reason that this conversation came up was that we were watching the movie If, which is really adorable. If you haven't seen it, I recommend you do. It's a fun little movie, pretty wholesome. Anyway, but so it reminded me of all this. Anyway. Didn't live there, like I said, very long, 1.5 years, 2 years. And then off we went to Milpitas, which is in the South Bay area of the San Francisco Bay Area. It's in what they call the Silicon Valley. And, now it's the Silicon Valley. But when we moved there, it was all cornfields and orchards. So, but it was a new community, a new development. And really exciting because I lived there during the years that this small farm town grew into what it is today as part of the Silicon Valley, and it's quite a transformation. Matter of fact, I probably wouldn't even recognize it if I went there today. Anyway, so moved Milpitas, and everything was fantastic. And then on my 5th birthday, my sister decided to arrive, and everything changed. No, but yeah, my sister Lexi was born on my 5th birthday, and so she and I were raised there in this community. It was a brand new housing development, everything brand new. And the neighborhood was absolutely the most diverse place that a child could be raised. And looking back, and I really feel fortunate, and I feel like I'm a better person for it today as a result of growing up in that environment. Of course, my parents grew up in San Francisco, so coming out there was a big change for them. But anyway. But the diversity that existed in this community was much like what they experienced in the city. To one side of us, we had a family from Holland that had survived the Holocaust, and a couple of houses down from there. From them was another family that was from Ecuador. Another family in the other direction was from Mexico. Next door to them was a family from the Philippines. and you kind of get the idea. Oh, and then to top it all off, and this was during the 60s and 70s, mind you, across the street from us was the family of Carters, who I became very close with. Matter of fact, my sister Lexi became best friends with their daughter Angela. But it was a mixed couple, which back in those days was a very rare thing. But this is what I was exposed to as a young lad, and so it really molded me into the guy I am. And then there was also a Japanese family that lived on the block as well. I mean, so you can kind of get the idea. And that was kind of the world I grew up in. And these are the people that I went to the park and played baseball with, and or soccer or football or basketball or whatever. I mean, it was really growing up there. I would actually go so far as to compare it to The Sandlot. If you could envision that movie, that's the way it was in my neighborhood. The kids would come riding up on their bikes, and they'd all pile up to the driveway, run up to the front door, and ding, 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 ding. Get Johnny, come out, play baseball. I mean, that's the way it was. You grabbed your glove, you grabbed your ball, your mitt, and off you went. And you didn't come back until, the street lamps started to flicker a little bit, because that's when you knew you had to be home before the street lamps came. So, yeah, pretty good childhood. Now, as far as relationships go, my father, great provider, really intelligent, funny man. You could tell a great story. And he passed away just 3 years ago now, but when he was alive, he was a great guy to hang out with and be around. But a lot of that really didn't happen for me until I became an adult, because frankly, being the child of a police officer during the 60s and 70s, you're talking about the Vietnam War era. There was a lot of angst. People really looked down on the police back then. That's where the term pigs came into play. And, so being the son of that cop was no easier than being the cop. And so, school, I was getting in fights all the time. Got the shit kicked out of me more times than I can count, but it taught me how to fight. And pretty soon I was doing this shit kicking too, so, but that was kind of the way it was. It was kind of rough that way. And it was like, every other day, getting into a fight with some jackass who wants to prove himself over some ridiculous bullshit, whatever, But that was kind of the way it was. And then as far as my father and our relationship goes, it was a strained relationship. Without getting into too much detail, I'll just say he was a serious disciplinarian, and he didn't take any shit, and you couple that with the fact that at the same time, I really don't think that he wanted to be married to my mother. And so a lot of that, looking back now at 60, it's easy for me to kind of look back and having lived a little and kind of analyze it a little bit. But I would say he didn't want to be with her, and all of his frustration from that was then kind of funneled at me. And so that kind of tells the story of where we were at when I was a child. And so, and it didn't, unfortunately, our relationship didn't get better till much later in life. I mean, for a long time, sadly, he and I didn't speak, and it was difficult. It was heartbreaking, but it just, things happen, So, I mean, I remember one time I was graduating. I was a young soldier. I was I just been promoted to specialist E4, and they shipped me off to the non-commissioned officers academy, and I went, yanked me out of the field, and took me into this academy, and it's 250 of us entered the class, and 168 graduated. So it was a high fallout rate. And of the 168, I graduated, eighth in my class. So I contacted my dad. Now, I was at Fort Ord, which my father only lived about an hour or so away. And I reached out to my father, who had, by the way, never seen me, in uniform on base, never came to my graduation ceremony for boot or anything, AIT, nothing. And that was okay. I mean, I was in Georgia, and Kentucky for those events. So I called him up, and I'll never forget it. And it's funny how things stick with you, but I'll never forget his words. He said, "I'm sorry, but I don't have the time." And it just, something like that, just, it doesn't, it like engraves itself in the back of your head. And I thought, okay, well, and then years later, we had a conversation about it, and I don't know how it came up, but we were just talking about the subject, about the military or something. And he said, "Man, I really regret that." But it was where we were at that point in time. And so it's funny how time changes you, and in this case can brings you back closer together. Maybe through each of us maturing and growing, we found a way back to that, and we're able to look back on things that we experienced together through different lens. And so when he passed, I actually felt pretty good about our relationship. So anyway.
What's the story of how Grandpa Jim and Grammy met? You want to tell us about that as much as you know?
Well, I don't know a lot because, again, I don't think he really wanted to be with her. And so it wasn't something that he might brag about or be proud to talk about, right? I think he kind of kept it tucked away, because it wasn't like that for him. Like me, I mean, I tell people, how your mom and I met, or how Mary and I met. Those are positive things for me. Anyway, but what I do know, he said that he was catting around. They were both going to college, and he was catting around, and I guess he was, let's just say, he was sowing his oats, and had many women in his circle, one of whom was my mother, and another of whom was named Lexi, who he was actually madly in love with. But anyway, very simply put, he got what he wanted, and he got more than he bargained for, and then I came along, and so he and my mother married, and she left college to raise me, and he went on to become a policeman and fireman. The interesting thing to note here is that he was planning on traveling to Australia to become a bush pilot, and my appearance in the world just completely altered his life plans. And I mean, obviously I had nothing to do with that myself, but in some small way I can't help but feel a little bad for him, because I know what it's like to have dreams, and then those dreams don't come to fruition. So but he never got a shot. I mean, the closest he ever came was flying in the Bay Area to get his pilot's license, so which I don't think he had a chance to finish because he couldn't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
But he did fly solo one time, which was cool. So and what's really cool about that is it kind of tied him to his father in a small way, because my grandfather Cecil, his father, he was in the Army Air Corps in its earliest years. I'm talking the beginning of flight, and the introduction into the military. And he was actually a mechanic. And what's interesting about how they did things back then, we've all seen biplanes and they have the two cockpits. And what a lot of people don't know is that one of those slots, one of those cockpits is for the pilot, and the other one is for the mechanic, because back in those days, they did not have airports everywhere where you could land, get repaired, and then go back up again. So if they had to go down, they needed a mechanic, Johnny on the spot, to get it going again. So I thought that was neat how my father bridged that gap with his father. I thought that was very cool. So yeah, but that's, as far as I know, I don't know exactly how they met, other than they met in school, and the rest is all history from there. So
yeah, and I don't know a lot about, and you and I have talked about this, and this is kind of one of the topics that pops up from time to time in this little corner of the internet. The topic of cultural domicide, and which, you and I have traced some of this back to the topic of domicide means, like, basically the separation of the home, the fragmentation of the home. And so you and I have talked about pointing to how a lot of family records and connections get lost in the Civil War, has a lot to do with a lot of American domicide as far as heritage goes. and just my own personal heritage of domicide. I know almost nothing about great grandpa Cecil. I know a little more about Grandpa Lewis.
Yep.
And
Papa Hollifield.
Papa Hollifield.
Yep, your grandmother's father.
Yes. Did they call him Dutch?
When he worked on the docks, he went by two names, Dutch and Whitey. And before I get into his story, I will just say that listening to you right now, share that with me. That is the very reason that I have written my 4 novels, and why I intend to write another that is specifically about those two men, Cecil and Lewis, because they're from the same era. And it kind of brings us from our inception here as Americans with William Bruce, and then launches us into a more modern era, which actually, when I say modern, I'm talking about the days of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, and their lives and their trials and tribulations that they experienced coming through that on the other end, and how they ended up where they were, and their journeys along the way, which I found to be fascinating myself, listening to my grandfather tell the story, hearing stories about my parents. Fascinating stuff. That, I mean, they did things that people today would not even consider, but they did them because it was the type of desperate times that people today have never experienced. And so, yeah, but hearing your curiosity about that, again, that's why I mean, I literally am in this closet 24/7 trying to get these books not only written but narrated and out there, because for the first 50 years of my life, I couldn't even tell you what my nationality of origin was. I mean,
Yeah.
shit. I mean, I didn't know if I was Dutch, German, English, Scottish, Chinese, Japanese. I didn't know. And that's really what inspired me to, when I started learning about those things, that's really what inspired me to write these books, because it became vividly clear to me as a 50-year-old man. I honestly, I found myself thinking, you know what? I'm 50 years old and I don't even know what my nationality is. And I've asked my father and I asked my grandfather, neither of whom they just didn't know, because at some point there was a breakdown in passing along the family story, the family heritage, which is really quite sad because after researching it and finding out so much about who these people really were and what their contributions were, I said it in my first book. I would have been remiss had I not dove in head first and made an effort to write it all down. And it wasn't something I could share over a campfire story. There was just so much that I knew it had to be written in novel form. So that's where I am today. But so that you and your child and your brother and his sons and their sons and their sons' sons will always have something to reference back to go, this is who we are, this is where we came from and how we got here. And I've always been proud to be an American. I mean, I served in the military. Hell, I was a Boy Scout and a Cub Scout. I mean, that was just the era I grew up in. And so I am a patriot at heart. But it just, things were so much different back then when I grew up, and today you don't really have that. But I didn't know, besides being an American, I didn't know who else I was, and learning all that has really brought me to a completely new place as a man.
Yeah. And so for me, this topic has always kind of lingered my whole life. This idea of kind of like a disconnection from the past and
from like knowing your roots.
Yes. And also, my mother was adopted,
right?
So this is always kind of like a
mystery.
Yeah, and also kind of just always floating somewhere.
I know that feeling. I lived with it for 50 years.
And I think honestly, this is one of those reasons, because I wasn't actually connected either to a religious tradition growing up. That has that I think if I would have had that, which I don't blame anybody for not bringing him in.
Sure,
it is what it is, and
right. But it made us who we are today as well.
Right, and when I think about like my love for movies, I think has a lot to do with a longing, a vacancy brought on by the domicide, and so I loved movies.
By the void that is aching to be filled by truth, and when you in the absence of truth, you find it in these other mediums.
Yep, and the stories, love stories. So what I mean, if you're willing to share a little bit about, because I think it'd be fun and interesting to go back a little bit and to hear about Lewis and a little bit about that, and then maybe we can go like forward from there if you want.
Sure. Well, I would probably talk about Lewis and Cecil and Nellie all kind of in the same breath. Again, because they came from that same era in this nation's history. And it was a difficult time to be alive. It really was. I mean, the Dust Bowl had, devastated crops in certain regions of the country, not all of the Midwest, but the wave, the domino effect, if you will, that came with that just devastated the economy, and the crops were useless. They couldn't grow anything. So these were people that not only were dirt poor, but mind you, now they can't even grow food to feed themselves. And my grandfather Lewis, his father was a sharecropper in Arkansas. And I forget how many brothers and sisters he had. Forgive me for that. But I think it was like 8 brothers and sisters. And so it had reached a point in Arkansas where this is 1933. It had reached a point, and mind you, there's still a lot of people think of the Great Depression and they think of 1929. And what history will teach you is that 1929 was kind of the point at which they acknowledged it, and that's when the first big part of the crash hit because of the run on the banks. And the sad thing is they forget after that for the next 4 or 5 years, the depression lingered. So it wasn't just like 1929; it was like 1929 on. And then when you couple that with the Dust Bowl, and now people they're not only dirt poor and don't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, but they can't even grow their own food. So what do? You can't make money. You can't grow your own food. Well, I know what I would do. I'd get the hell out of there. And that's what Lewis did. He and his brother Henry walked. They walked from Arkansas to California. That just blows my mind. I mean, I think about, holy shit. Could you imagine? I mean, me walking to you right now, that's like, what, 1,700 miles? I mean, hello.
Yeah. I'll just get right on that.
Yeah. But hey, here's the thing. He was a farm strong country boy. He wasn't a big man. He was only, I think, maybe 5'5". He was, wasn't very tall. 5'6" maybe in boots, and that's all he wore were boots by the time I was born. But it wasn't always that way. But just yoked. I mean, he was just yoked. I mean, wide, broad chest, big arms. I mean, you could tell he'd been slinging bales of hay since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, which he was, because his father pulled him out of school in the 3rd grade to work the farm because, again, even before the Depression hit, times were tough. And this was very common back then. And so if a kid could be helping, provide for the family, that's what they did. They didn't go to school. That's a privilege. And so he pulled him out of school in the 3rd grade. He never returned. So he had been working man's labor since he was a child. So he and his brother Henry, they make their way to California. When they get there, he's looking for work, and he decides, well, I'm going to try to join the army. So he goes, tries to join the army, and they reject him. I mean, the guy is built like a friggin' tank, right? Not an ounce of fat on him. Not book smart at all, but back then you didn't have to have they didn't have requirements like that. You know what I mean? But they didn't accept him because they said he had flat feet. And so, actually it's kind of his good fortune that worked out that way, because from there he moved on to the San Francisco Bay Area, where he started working on the docks in Oakland and San Francisco. And again, this was back before the unions. These were 12 and 16-hour shifts back in the day when these sacks weighed 200 pounds and you had to put them on your back. There were no forklifts. These guys, I mean, literally physically humped the cargo on and off the ship. And so he was built for that, right? And so he got in and he started doing it. And shortly after he became a dock worker, that's when the unions came in, and the Longshoreman Union was trying to establish itself in the San Francisco, Oakland Bay Area. So my father's, now again, looking back, this is early unions, and what they were trying to provide back then was just a safe work environment, a fair wage, and enough hours in between shifts that you could get some rest so that you're not going to come back and injure yourself. All the things that we take for granted that protect us as workers today. But those things did not exist back then. And a lot of my grandfather's friends were getting injured. And I mean bad, broken legs, broken backs. And he saw that and he's like, you know what, screw this. This has got to stop. And so he looked into this longshoreman union and got on with them. And the problem was none of the shops, none of the warehouses were union. They were all, individually owned shops. And those guys didn't want to give up their power because they were making money hand over fist over these guys that were killing themselves to do the work. So what the union did, it was, and by the way, this is a story told to me by my grandfather when I was actually already a grown man, years and years after he had retired. So anyway, so what the unions had to do was they had to find a way to establish themselves. And how they did it was they would get one of their guys undercover, so to speak, hired on at a particular warehouse. And then that guy would go in, and it was his idea, his mission to basically share the propaganda about the unions and stir up the pot and get people saying, yeah, I want that. And then, getting them to strike and, until they became a union shop. So that's what my grandfather did for the Longshoremen's Union. And I'll never forget when he finally came out and told me. I always knew my grandfather was a bit of let's just say, he was a hard man. Big heart, but tough as nails. And so anyway, and I experienced that when I was 8 years old, when he pulled a gun on a tenant who was giving him shit at his apartment complex. That's another story I'll share with you. But back to the other one. So he tells me, yeah, I had to go into this one shop, and I'm going to try to use his words. So I went into this one shop, and this one son bitch, well, he found out that I was with the union, so he fired my ass. So I said, all right, you sucker, I'll fix your fucking wagon. I said, what'd you do? He said, well, next day, I went down there, 3-piece suit, because you have to understand, the dock was right down the street from San Francisco's financial district. And back in those days, those guys wore 3-piece suits and hats and fancy shoes, right? So he says, I got me my suit and my hat, and I waltzed on down to the dock. And then I got out to the backside and I slipped it off, set it down, folded up, took off my coat, right, and put that in. And then I pulled on a pair of coveralls to cover up my shirt and pants. And then he says, and I went around into that warehouse and I took a knife and I fucking gutted him like a catfish. And I'm a grown-ass man. I'd already been in the military at this point. Now I'm hearing this story and I'm going, wait, what? You telling me you killed a guy? But he was much older at that point, and I think he was kind of like at a point where, keeping the secrets was something that wasn't fresh at the front of his mind, and things were coming out that would never have come out before. But just hearing him tell that tale. And then he says after he killed the guy, he walks back around, takes off the coveralls, tosses the knife in the bay, tosses the coveralls in a bin, slips on his coat, puts back on his hat, and walks right out. And he says, as I'm walking down the street, goddamn SFPD are running past me to find out what happened. And he just walks right by. They didn't even look at him because he looked like a businessman. Mm-hmm. So, it's funny. And I don't want to get into politics, but I will say this. It's funny how we can look at some of our politicians today who have been there for a long time and we know what kind of money they make, and yet they're millionaires. I mean, like millions upon millions of dollars. And you wonder, golly, how the heck did that happen? And of course, to me, common sense dictates that, oh, well, come on, there's something going on there that shouldn't. And the reason I bring that story up is that it's an analogy really for my grandfather, because here's a man who had a third grade education who died a multimillionaire. And all he did his whole life was work for the Longshoremen's Union. Come on. And I mean, he was making money, as a hitman for the union. Now, again, this is just a story that he told me. That's all I can do is share what he shared with me. But then I did do some digging, and there was a couple of guys that were always around when I was a kid. One of them was a guy by the name of Gus, and his wife, Irene, I believe it was. And then this other fella by the name of Stan. And they were always around. And I was just a kid, and I didn't know what to think of it. Well, I learned years later that those guys were his crew. And so it was Uncle Stan and Uncle Gus. And he had the most fascinating attorney. Now, mind you, remember the era we're talking about here. A woman, a female attorney, a cigar-smoking female attorney, and I met her many, many a time as a young lad, and I could tell you she was tough as nails. If I dare I say, one tough bitch, okay? I mean, serious. She was so successful that she owned the building where the Orpheum Theater in San Francisco is. And she used the corner of that building for her offices and her living space. And let me just say that I visited there many a time and found myself sitting in front of a television while my grandfather and his attorney talked business in the bedroom. But she was in fact his attorney, and I tell that story because frankly I think that anyone that knew him like I knew him would tell you the same way. And in fact, for many years, Lewis and she are believed to have had a son. And gosh, I can't remember his name now, but I'd actually met him. He used to come to swim at my grandfather's pool where he lived, an apartment complex. My grandfather owned a big, huge apartment complex in Walnut Creek, California, which is, by the way, a very upscale town in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're talking big money. And here's this guy with the third grade education living there, owning an apartment complex. Yeah, come on. Yeah, do the math. So, yeah. And now, mind you, while all of this was happening with Lewis, there's my father's parents, Cecil and Nellie. Now, at the time that my grandfather was Lewis was walking from Arkansas to California, my other grandparents were in Kansas City. And Nellie had just lost a baby. She just miscarried. Again, same scenario. No work, can't grow your own food. This thing was impacting the entire country. Times were tough, the likes of which people today, again, cannot even begin to fathom. I mean, I've studied all of it for years, and I cannot even begin to fathom it. Anyway, so that being said, right shortly after she lost the child, they literally jumped onto a freight train like you see in the movies, climbed in there, reach out your hand, I mean, the whole 9 yards. I mean, like something out of a Hollywood movie. But they jumped, which is dangerous as hell. I mean, just trying to get on one of those things and get off one of those things when it's moving. I mean, that's risky business. But then you don't know what kind of nefarious fellows are going to be on there when you do. You know, so that being said, they hopped from train to train to train to train from Kansas City to California, where they landed in the Central Valley. Now, anyone that knows the Central Valley, it's basically the salad bowl of America. And they were in an area that grew walnuts and almonds.
Mm.
And so, young couple, and I should preface this by saying, because I until now I haven't really had an opportunity, but the thing to know about Nellie and Cecil is that they have known each other since they were 4 years old.
Mm.
They grew up not far on farms, not far from each other, and they were like the only two children that age. And so they had been playing in the sandbox, in the dirt, whatever. You know, their childhoods were spent together, so they'd known each other their entire lives. So anyway, so they hop train to train. They end up in the Silicon Valley or the Central Valley, and strangely enough, Nellie, even though she comes from the Midwest, does not know how to cook. Which blows my mind because, boom, I mean, most people that grow up on a farm, that's one of the things you learn, this self-sufficiency, right? So anyway, they end up in the Central Valley, and she doesn't really have any skills, right? But she has an interest in cooking. And so she goes to this restaurant there in, I think it's Corcoran, California. And she meets this woman, a Latina, who decides, okay, I'll take you on, I'll teach you. And she taught my grandmother how to cook. And might I say, my grandmother was an amazing cook and made the most incredible from scratch pies, any kind of pie you could possibly imagine. That said, though, hearing that she didn't know how to cook when I heard this story was really fascinating to me. But even more fascinating was learning how she did learn how to cook and from whom. So I really enjoyed hearing that story. So she went on to be a cook, and that's how she helped support the two of them while they were out there. And your grandfather did whatever he could pick up. Again, it was tough times. So she was really lucky to land a job at a place that was still open and a restaurant that was, you know what I mean? And be able to work as a cook. But eventually, she started having health issues. And when speaking with the physician, he said quite simply, you come from the Midwest to the Central Valley of California, and the pollens are different, because she was having a hard time breathing. And she'd never experienced that before. She thought she was maybe working towards a heart attack or something. And she was a young woman. But she learned that she just had a severe case of allergies to, the pollen from all these trees and whatnot that she was surrounded by, literally. So from there, she said, what do we do? He says, move to the coast. So they did. They moved to San Francisco. And that's where they had my father, and that's where he was born and raised. Well, he was actually born in Corcoran, but they took him and went to San Francisco. So, and mind you, by that time, they also already had another child. My father's oldest sister, Darlene. So both of whom were born in Corcoran. But shortly after my father was born, they had to move and spent the rest of my father spent the rest of his youth in San Francisco. And the stories he told, wow. Back in a time when you really wanted to be in San Francisco, because it was really a fascinating place. Unlike today, which is unfortunately falls short of the mark.
Mm-hmm. So, but I think, obviously there's a lot more to it than what I've shared, but just the notion that, how they
went from point A to point B essentially at the same time. They were basically running parallel to each other. One more to the south and one to the north. Because this was at a time. Remember, this is at a time we didn't have all these freeways everywhere. So I mean, it was quite a feat. Which is why, getting from Kansas City to California by rail seemed like the most logical method.
Yeah, and interestingly, the story that my mother has told me about, she over the last few years had learned more about her actual biological family.
Right, I was super excited to hear about that.
Yeah, and so very her
cool.
Mother came from Oklahoma,
right,
for the same reasons.
Of Scottish descent.
Yeah, right around the same time as the rest of my great grandparents.
The story of millions. I mean, think about it. Where did country music really get its roots? Where did it get its hold on the nation? Was when so many of those people moved to Bakersfield, California, to escape the Midwest and what they were living through. And this community of players found themselves, getting together to play just to entertain themselves, because Bakersfield wasn't really a city back then. It was just like a stopover for the train. And so, a reputation, the word started getting out about all these amazing musicians that are playing in Bakersfield. And the importance of that is that not far away from there is Hollywood, who is also just coming into its own from the silent movie era into talkies. And so they're asking in Hollywood, in its fledgling years, they're asking, well, how do we fill the dead air? How do we enhance these movies? Especially like the cowboy movies and whatnot. They could bring in an orchestra for a drama, the violins and all that, but you can't. That's not going to play well with a cowboy movie or whatever, So they started bringing in these musicians from, out in the Central Valley in Bakersfield to come and play in the movies, and their music took off, and country music took off from there. But I mean, it's just a mixing of different styles of music from the Midwest.
Well, right in the Midwest this is kind of interesting to me, that how diverse the Midwest in itself is from itself. I mean, you go from up near where I am,
right?
Just go south into Chicago, and just go even more south into Indiana, and then you just keep going further. I mean, that whole Midwest is super diverse. So,
yep,
start having these.
Well, and you have people. You had, when those areas were first being, moved into by settlers, you had groups of people, from Germany moving into Wisconsin.
Oh yeah.
And so a pseudo a German American culture kind of comes from that, right? They bring a lot from where their roots are, but then it evolves over time, and you see the same thing in pockets all across the country, where these groups of people from different backgrounds, like the Shenandoah Valley. I mean, it was heavily populated with Scottish and Irish, more than anything. German too, but a tremendous number of Scottish and Irish folks and we're talking about land that had never been lived on by anyone but Native American Indians to that time, primarily the Haudenosaunee and the Shawnee tribes, who really populated that northern neck of the Shenandoah Valley. But so they moved in there and they brought with them what they knew from their past. I mean, you're what I'd say, I guess he's your eighth great grandfather when he established himself in the Shenandoah. He first purchased the land from the Shawnee, and carved out a life literally from the forest. It wasn't like walking into a tract home area and saying, that looks like a good one, I'll take it. These people, they got themselves out there without any guides, just with the sweat of their brow. They found their spot, as he did. He purchased it from the Shawnee, and then he started chopping down trees and building a house and a barn, and working his land, and that's how these people survived. They didn't have grocery stores, like we do today. So your great grandfather he was a huntsman, so he would provide a lot of the people that lived around him with meat, and that's how he made his living.
Yeah. So this is pretty interesting. I don't know if I ever told you this, but excuse me, the church that I attend is from a very small community. It's called Lebanon. Now, that community was established, or how do I put this? So the first thing that happened was the settlers that came, they first made a school. They didn't make a church first. They made the school. That was 180 years ago, and which is before Wisconsin was even a church, or I'm sorry, a state.
Sure.
And,
well, just like your great grandfather who established himself before the country was even a country. Virginia was a colony.
Yes. And so then the year after that is when they established the church. And what's interesting to me is I feel very fortunate to be living in this little community, because like my wife and I think the pastor and his family are like the newest people in the whole thing.
Right.
Because like these people have been, going
for
there
generations.
Yes. And it still exists as a generational place, which I think is very fortunate for me, because I need those kinds of roots, and I need to be able to, especially starting the family that we are. I don't feel like I hope I never have the compulsion to leave here or whatever, or the impulse to leave. This feels like home,
right?
So it's nice to become established as a new family with some folks that have been doing it very well for a long time.
Absolutely.
And I can sit back and just pay attention and try and get from those folks, and that's been really cool.
That is cool. Well, if it's any consolation to you, I found that the essence of what you're talking about, of community, that very same feeling and vibe when I visited Albin, Virginia. I went back in 2018, I believe it was, to the town that was named after our grandfather, and was, there are things you can't learn from a book. And walking the streets and speaking with the people that lived there was absolutely enlightening. I mean, almost mind-blowing, in fact. And what I learned was that the people that lived there have been living there for generations. And they're so proud to call themselves from Albin, right? And that was another interesting thing. I believe I was 54 years old at the time, and my whole life I had been told that our last name was Albin, pronounced as such, Albin. And when I went to Albin, Virginia, I was corrected by all the residents I spoke with. Oh no, it's Albin. It's a tradition we've been passed down since the day our families got here. I mean, and it's important to them. But the fact, this, like one woman, she said, her parents were raised there. They raised her there. She raised her kids there, and now her kids are raising her grandkids there, and so on and so forth. And it just filled me with this joy, knowing that people in this town from our family's history still have this genuine love, and it runs deep, just like what I heard you describing a moment ago. It's a rare thing for me, because I've never experienced it, but in a few cases, that being one of them. But it's just not something you see every day. I think so many of us just take it for granted, So when you come across something that's so rare as that, and special, you really have to appreciate it. I can see why you wouldn't want to move, and I think it's a great place for my grandbaby to grow up. So.
Okay, so let's go back to your home as a child, and let's talk about. Tell me more about what school is like for you, or were you raised in a like a spiritual home or religious home at all? Did you have what were your interests as you grew up? How did you however you want to take that, like what was high school like? What were your interests? Yada 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 yada.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, let's see. We weren't a religious family at all. My father had been raised in a very religious family and hated church and refused to go. And so God was never talked about in my home. He was, I believe, a Baptist, and my mother was Catholic. And so I was baptized Catholic as a baby, but never went to Catholic church. We never went to church. And it actually wasn't until I started getting older that I showed an interest. And I ended up going with other families to their churches, but never with my family. But I digress. Other things, golly. Well, I was a Cub Scout. I was a Boy Scout, and I soared through, all of the badges and all that kind of stuff. Until I was about 13, and that was the time that my parents got a divorce and everything went to shit. And I was on the verge of my Eagle Scout. I only needed a service project and 4 merit badges, which was, I already had planned my project and everything to do. But when you don't, and this is an important topic, and it really speaks to what we've been talking about here today. Is that when that family structure breaks down, it doesn't just impact the 2 people who decide they don't want to be together anymore. And that particular series of events really knocked my train off of its tracks, because at that point in life, like I say, I was on the verge of getting my Eagle Scout. I was a great student. And then after that, I just lost interest, and I didn't have any guidance, and I was just kind of like a tumbleweed blown in the wind, so to speak. My parents were both wrapped up in their own lives, and like so many of us, I was just left to kind of figure it out. So never did get my Eagle Scout, and then school went to shit after that. I was the best student, or one of the best students in my class at the time, leading up to that. I mean, I was always straight A's. It was all very regimented. I was really into learning, and I really excelled at it. And I love to learn. I still love to learn. But at that time, especially at that a pivotal time in any child's life, early teens, there's enough to figure it out, without having to deal with the other issues. So that's one thing that I hope our return to God as a nation will help to remedy. Anyhow, that being said, other interests I had besides Scouts, I loved, all that came with that, camping and cooking out and doing events, community service, all that was awesome. I can remember as a scout doing, we used to, back in the day, we didn't collect aluminum cans. We collected bottles, and we collected newspapers of all things. And so we used to have these newspaper drives, and I can tell you, like, well, you'd have like 10 of the parents driving around their car. Picture this, with scouts, like 10 of them in each car, because we had a big pack, hanging out the windows and doors, pickup trucks where kids were riding in the back of the bed, which in California, that's illegal today. But, this is hanging on to the tailgate, or like these station wagons sitting on the tailgate down of a station wagon, driving around neighborhoods all over town, collecting newspapers because people knew that we did it, and they would save them up and they would tie them up a string, or they'd put them in those brown paper bags that you get from the grocery store, right? And so us kids were chasing around the neighborhood, jumping out the cars while they were still moving, jumping out of the trucks while they were still moving, and running to the next house, racing each other to get there to see who was going to get the next, the next score, and it was a lot of fun, and we would do that, pretty frequently over the years. I mean, I can recall doing it several times. I remember one time, and we would always, once the car got filled, you then would return back to a designated area where there was a big, huge bin. And then we would unload them into the bin. And one time I was with a group that was responsible for loading the bin. And so we were having a little bit of fun, and there was a hatch on the top of it. So we filled it all up, and then we built up a wall, and then had like this little secret area back in there where we could just come in and out through the top and nobody knew. Yeah, we got reamed for that because we had to backfill it. But just the things you remember from childhood, silly things. I was huge into sports. I mentioned that I grew up in a neighborhood that was really parallel with the Sandlot. It's just like that. But when I moved there, I was 4 years old. I didn't know shit about sports. I didn't know how to play baseball or basketball, nothing. I was 4 years old, But fortunately for me, a lot of the kids in the neighborhood were older. And they were pretty cool, and they didn't mind, back then, they didn't mind if you sat and watched them play. And sometimes they'd have you be like with, the invisible runner, and you would run the bases for them because they only had so many guys that could, play a game. So they'd have like, you'd pitch to yourself and catch for yourself. And it was just, overhand lob baseball. And then you'd have like a third baseman, a shortstop, and maybe a left fielder, or maybe a left fielder and a center fielder. And that was the lane that you played the game in. And if a ball was hit on the ground to the third base or shortstop, they would throw it to the pitcher, who, if he caught it, the guy was out. And that's how we did it. And us kids would go and watch these guys play. Well, eventually, us little kids got older, and we had been playing with these guys and running the bases for them, and like, sitting. We had a backstop and stuff, little shitty little backstop, but we'd be back behind the batter, and we'd throw the ball back to the pitcher. And that's how I learned to throw a baseball, was being behind the backstop and throwing it back to the pitcher as a little kid. But again, we eventually all grew up, and before you knew it, the old kids were playing with the little kids, and we were picking teams and having a full-on game, basically. And that's how I learned to play baseball. That's how I learned to play football, soccer, all those things, from those older kids in my neighborhood. And I think it's safe to say the same is true for all the guys I grew up with. There weren't a lot of girls that came out back in those days and played those games with us, those sports with us. But all the guys that I grew up with, that was the world we lived in. We played during baseball season. We played baseball. We played football. And then soccer. I remember soccer first came into the fray in 1974 when I was 10 years old. Before that, I mean, you wouldn't really catch soccer because it wasn't broadcast in this country, very rarely, except for like the Olympics and that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, here was soccer, and they had this American Soccer League that came into, and then and the soccer craze exploded, and everyone started playing soccer. I remember guys that were used to play basketball or baseball with me or football. They were like, "Screw this! I'm going to play soccer," and they go and play soccer instead, and that became the thing. But yeah, big into sports. Played baseball for many years. Was pretty decent. Made the All-Star several times. Had one championship season. It was pretty awesome. And yeah, so that was the thing I loved to do. And my love of baseball probably grew more than the other sports. And I loved, because I grew up watching guys like Willie Mays and Willie McCovey and Orlando Cepeda, Pete Rose. These guys were just larger than life. Brooks Robinson at third base, the human vacuum cleaner for the Baltimore Orioles. I mean, how do you not fall in love with such a poetic sport? Where these guys hit a speeding ball with a stick. And anyway, it really captured my attention. And so from the time as young as I can remember, I mean, I've had this love of baseball. And if you come into my office now, I mean, the walls are covered in here with paraffin. Well, you've seen it, so with all kinds of, and they're just memories from my youth, memories from when you were a child, memories from when your brother was a child, and so on and so forth. Memories shared with my father. I mean, the last time he and I went to a baseball game together was in Houston to watch the Giants and Astros play, and I'll never forget it. It was not long thereafter that he passed. So, but that was something he and I did. That was the one thing that he and I truly, genuinely enjoyed together. Baseball. I remember one time he took me to a game at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. It was the San Francisco Giants and the Cincinnati Reds. Back in the days of the big red machine, Joe Morgan, Johnny Bench, Concepcion, those guys, right? I mean, just mammoth stars in baseball. Great team. So anyway, we go to this doubleheader at the Stick, and we get in there. We watch the first game, and the Giants just get their asses handed to them like big time, right? And then to make matters worse, it starts getting cold. Now, anyone who ever got a chance to see a game at the Stick, baseball or football, mind you, before they tore it down, will tell you that place had a climate of its own, and the winds would come off the San Francisco Bay and just whip through there, and it was colder than a well digger's ass. I'm telling you right now, son, colder than a well digger's arse. So we're sitting there, and we're in like the upper deck nosebleed seats, okay? I mean, my dad was a cop. I mean, he didn't make a lot of money, but he took me to the game. And so we're there, we're watching the second game, and we're both just freezing our asses off. I mean, colder than a well digger's ass. And so he says, come on. And we leave. We go to the car, and he has his fireman's coat in the back of the car because he has to carry it with him wherever he goes, right? So we go and we rush back to our seats, and he has me sit between him. And my dad was 6'4", big guy. And he pops this little turd down in between his legs and takes that fireman's coat and wraps us up. And so we're watching the rest of the second game for all you freezing still, right? And my father says, screw this, we're out of here. Okay, so we leave. We get out to the car. We get on the freeway. He turns on KMBR 68 to listen to the game. I think that was the station at the time. And he tunes it in. And all of a sudden, the Giants go from getting their clocks handed to them, their clocks clean, their asses handed to them, and they're starting to score runs. They're scoring runs. They're scoring runs. They're scoring runs. Turns out to be like the greatest comeback in Giants history.
Wow.
to that time, and we freaking missed it because our giblets were shaken. And true story, I have never left the game since. Never, and my father either. After that, it was like nothing was really ever said about it, but it was like in that moment, us listening to it and screaming and cheering and thinking, "Oh shit, we missed it." Like in that moment, there was like this subliminal pact that took place. I will never leave another game early again, and I haven't the rest of my life. And I used to be a season ticket holder, so I mean that's a lot of games to finish, But you just never know what's going to happen, So, that was one thing. Baseball, for me, provided a lot of great memories. Yeah.
Now, I don't remember a lot about early times, but I do know this. I got my love of chocolate ice cream from Candlestick Park. For sure.
Awesome.
Little cup with a little wooden like spoon.
Yeah.
And that's what I remember. I know you said that I met a lot of dudes like Jose Canseco and
yes,
a bunch of players, but I don't remember any of that, but I remember the ice cream.
Yeah, that is funny. Well, I can tell you were 4 and your brother Mike was 2. And I took you 2 guys, just the 3 of us, and we went to what they call the old timers game in Oakland. And essentially what it is before the A's game, a bunch of retired players come out and play an exhibition game for fun. And some of these guys are quite old at this point. I mean, it's just for fun, slow pitch, and so anyway, I took you to the game. We watched that, the old timers. Then we watched the A's game, and after the game, I took you 2 guys. I had Mike on my shoulders, and you in my right hand, and we walked down to the locker room. And when Canseco came out, he was not very nice, and his girlfriend or whoever at the time said, basically said, "Say hello to," because I guess he'd had a bad day, which he did in the game anyway. And so he said hello and stuff, but he, it wasn't probably a good time to meet him. But Mark McGuire, he was cool. And a couple of the other players came out, and then some of the old timers came out. And one of them, and he was, I believe he was a coach for the A's at the time, was Dusty Baker. And we actually met. He was the last one we met. I'll get to that. I got to tell that story separate because it's actually kind of cool. So, but Bill Rigney, a Hall of Famer, Orlando Cepeda, Hall of Famer, Juan Marichal, Hall of Famer. They all came out and came up to you guys and were talking with you. And hey, what's your name, mijo? Because they're Latinos, right?
Mm-hmm.
And talked with all those guys. They were so gracious and beautiful. And I didn't know if you guys would ever remember, but I wanted to be able to share that memory with you someday, like we are right now. Mm-hmm. And so, and then when we parted ways with those guys, we started to leave, and we had to walk up and over a hill to the other side of where we were parked. And when we were en route, we got to the top of the hill. When we got there, that's where we met Dusty Baker and his young daughter at the time. And she's a grown woman now, obviously, like you, grown man. But yeah, so, and he came walking up to you guys. I mean, I didn't even approach him, and he was just really gracious. Hey guys, how you gentlemen doing today? And I think we just got autographs. Oh yeah, let me see. And I pulled out the ticket, which I still have, and I showed it to him, and he goes, "Oh, you got Orlando's? Where'd you get Orlando? Where's Orlando?" And I turned around and I pointed because he was still standing next to his station wagon, and he was like, "Oh man, that's cool." And so he was just really interactive and polite and kind. And he introduced his daughter, and then he said, "Hey guys, I got to go. I'm going to catch up with Orlando before he takes off in that station wagon." and off he went. And that was our experience with him. That was kind of fun, but it just really was cool to see guys who really didn't have to go out of the way for a couple of kids. And it really speaks to, I think, how we've, baseball has been able to stay around for so long. Even people that don't necessarily ever play can have great memories of it through moments like that, and passing that joy down to the next generation in that way, and the tradition and beauty of it. Even though, frankly, today I think the Major League is kind of screwing the game up, but we'll not talk about that right now. We'll save that for another time. But yeah, go on.
So tell me about when did you what was your relationship with television growing up?
Television. Well, we had 3, sometimes 4 channels, and it was on a black and white television. And we had a big old ginormous antenna on the roof of the house. And my mom would stand outside and I would stand on the roof, and my dad would yell from the TV, "To the left! No, your other left! Good, whoa!" And my mom would relay it. Stop! We're good. And I'd be up there holding the antenna. We're good? And then, yeah. And I'd let go of it. Hold on, turn it. Wait, we lost it. And that's how it was growing up. And that's why I say sometimes we'd have 3, sometimes 4 channels. It just depended on which way the wind was blowing, ABC, NBC, CBS, And matter of fact, that's actually, my dad could never understand it, but because he went to San Jose State, but he was a fan of Stanford University football. And I was always a fan of Notre Dame, and he never said anything to me about it. But later in life, he asked me, he said, "Why the hell did you become a Notre Dame fan?" And I said, "Because, Dad, every Saturday morning they had the replay of the previous week's game, and they broadcast that week's name because the Irish always had a contract with NBC. And so that was the only team I got to watch. And so
interesting.
I fell in love with it, but that was pretty much TV. And then, of course, things evolved. We got eventually got cable and color TV, and now we had 12 or 13 channels, and then that obviously just kept growing from there. Matter of fact, my generation was the first generation of MTV, back when they actually played music videos. And I can remember.
Did you have an interest in television shows and stories like that? Or stories? Yeah,
absolutely. We used to watch. There were shows. I was in shows like Gunsmoke and All in the Family and the Partridge Family, the Jackson 5. There were just so many to choose from back in the day. We used to watch Hee Haw. We used to watch, and we watched as a family. We watched National Geographic, which was great. My dad was always really into that, and it exposed me to a lot of learning from a very young age, and that stayed with me, has stayed with me my entire life. I was also the first generation of Sesame Street. Sesame Street hit in 1969 when I was 5 years old, when right about the same time we moved to Milpitas. So, that's the generation I grew up. I grew up watching the Brady Bunch, But, we also watched old shows like My Three Sons and Dragnet, and One Adam 12, shows like that, so there it was kind of almost an indoctrination of sorts, looking back on it now, because we, back then a show was on at a certain time. It was on a certain time, and you had to be there to watch it. And so we were programmed to watch the programming, and we were front and center in front of that boob tube, and hence the name. at a certain time, and if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to wait for a commercial, or if you're going to run to the fridge, or if you went while the show was on, you come back in, what I miss? I mean, it was just such a different time to grow up. I mean, back then we had telephones that were mounted to the wall in our kitchen with like a 30-foot cord. Right. And when we first moved there, we had a shared line. So you'd have other people would be on your line. Oh, you still on? Okay. And you had to wait for them to.
Oh, the party lines.
Party lines. Yeah. You had to wait for them to finish before you could make a call. But anybody could be listening to you talk.
Right.
So it was crazy. That didn't last for long. And we went to our own setup, with our own line. 408-262-7171. That was our phone number.
Wow.
My whole childhood. And but yeah, you get a phone call, not so much as a young person, but once I became a teen, it was like you like if your mom would call, right? When we were kids in high school dating, she'd call and I'd take the phone and I'd stretch out that cord 30 feet to the bedroom, just to have a private conversation, and it was the same for everybody. And if you were on the phone, you were dodging the cord, and then sometimes it would come disconnected, fuck, and then you'd have to run back in and plug it back in again. And you're thinking the whole time, I know my sister did that. So it was just a different time, than you have today. I mean, hell, now people they can't part with their phones for more than 2 seconds, I mean, and it was funny too, because back in the day, and thank God we don't do this anymore, because it would be a madness. It would just be a madhouse. But every time the phone would ring, everybody would say, and don't ask me why, but they'd say, phone! Like, no shit, I can hear it ringing. Phone! And now, having lived it, I can tell you, I can translate that for you if you would like. Traduzca en inglés. That means I can't or am not going to get it, so somebody else needs to. Instead of just saying, hey, can you get the phone? Can someone get the phone? Phone!
Yeah. Much like being the old remote for the television. I'm sure that's the role you played for a while.
Oh, golly, for my whole youth, my whole childhood. Because we didn't have remote controls, man.
Right. No, I do remember.
I was a remote control for the TV. I was a remote control for the antenna. I was, for the channels, for the volume. Yeah. Yeah. I should have freaking grown up to be a TV repairman. I mean, how I didn't, I don't know.
I remember, it's interesting because I remember, I do remember living in Fort Ord, which is very strange that I remember parts of that. That's really all I remember. And then I remember briefly there was a spot in Salinas too that I think you and Mom shared for a brief moment.
Yes. Well,
but
before we get into that, I would tell you how I met your mom.
Yes, but before we get into that, I have to say the one thing I remember that we had a VCR that had a remote that had a cord stuck to the remote, and that's how and it was like a top loading deal. Yeah. So that's just kind of I don't know where
back in the day that was the shiznit, man. I'm telling you right now.
And I also remember
you didn't have to stand up and go walk over to it. You could sit on your butt and use the remote. We thought we were the cat's meow, man, back then. We were running shit.
I also remember Papa and Nana had a laser disc.
Yeah.
They had laser and it was it looked like a big ass laser disc.
It looked like a record album almost.
Yes. And the only movie that I remember they had, and I remember watching it, was it was like a hockey movie. I can't remember the name of the title of it, but it was like and there was like fighting in the hockey movie. It was like that's
it's hockey.
Right. Yeah. But that's
probably why Papa watched it, because he loved fighting and he was a huge fan of big time wrestling.
Oh,
long before the WWE. He used to talk about Moondog Mayne. Anyway, I digress.
excellent.
Good stuff.
Well, yeah, tell us about nearing the end of high school there and how you met my mother. And
All right. Yeah, cool. Well, like I said, a few years had passed since my parents had gone through their separation and divorce, and I was living with my mom at the time. And it was not, a real great situation. My mom, the divorce hit her hard, and she had a very difficult time dealing with it. And next thing you know, she was, going to the bars and hanging out. And I remember, 14, 15, before getting my driver's license, getting calls from the bar, hey, your mom's drunk, someone needs to come get her. And having to walk, I think it was only 2 miles, but having to walk 2 miles to the bar and go in, have somebody help me carry her to the car, get in, and then at 13, 14, 15 years old, whatever, driving her home, and then getting her inside. So it was kind of a tumult time. But I think I forget the age I was. I want to say I was like 16 and a half, right around that time, 16 and a half years old when I met your mom. And so how did we meet? I looked around everywhere for a job, and I managed to find myself a position as an entry-level cook at a place called the Big Yellow House. And it was right there in my hometown. And it was the Catch Me Out at the time. They were just coming into fray, and they were popping up locations all over the country. Of course, they went out of business because they expanded too quickly. But I digress again. Got a job as a cook, and learning, fast pace. Really enjoyed it. Lots of fun. Fun job for a teenage kid, being a cook in a restaurant like that. And so their primary thing was fried chicken. And how it worked was everyone got fried chicken, and there would be another protein that was served on a daily basis, and then vegetables, mashed potatoes, and gravy. Okay. And it was served home style. So it was brought out in bowls, and people served like if you were at home. Anyway, so I was back behind in the kitchen cooking, and your mom was a cashier. And the cashier was set up with her cash register directly in front of where my station was. And so she was like 5 or 6 feet away. And so the servers would come back, they'd give us the order, then they'd go to her and ring up, right? And so anyhow, I saw this cute girl standing over there, and I was like, dude, I got to get to know this guy. So I just started flirting with her, and she really wasn't really interested in me at the time. There was another guy, I think his name was Bill, who was older, and he was the head cook, and she thought he was hot. And so anyway, but I'm kind of persistent. So we became friends, and one day she asked me, she says, hey, can you take me over to Bill's house? He just lives right down the street. And we were both getting off work. And I was like, sure. So we jump in my car, and I had a car. I bought my own car. $1,250, a Pinto. Yeah, buddy. Anyway, so we jump in the car and we drive over to Bill's place, and she goes up to knock on his door or whatever. And I was taught, you don't just drop someone off and leave. I don't, man or woman, you wait till they're inside safe and sound, everything's cool, then you take off. All right, good. I'm out. Well, she went up, and thank God I didn't leave, because she knocked and knocked and knocked, and nobody ever answered. So she comes back to the car, and she gets in, and it was like, oh, not there, huh? No. And so I'm like, well, want me to take you home? She's like, sure. So I take her home. Now, you have to remember, this was my second Pinto. The first one I had for one day. and I got smashed into from in the right quarter panel by a big gigantic Chrysler station wagon on the first night I had it. And the guy smashed into us about 60 miles an hour, knocked us over 2 lanes.
Wow.
And just trashed that car. And the buddy that was with me in the passenger seat, if he had hit us just a few inches farther back, he may not be here. It was that bad. Snapped the right front tire right off. I mean, big time crash. But then he took off. Anyhow, so I looked at him and he was like, "You okay? Yeah, you okay? Yeah." And we got out, and the second we got out, he had driven like a quarter mile down the road and stopped and gotten out of his car and was looking at us. And once he saw us get out of the car and it looked like we were okay, he jumped in his car and took off. So anyway, a couple of days later, I ended up getting the second Pinto, which was an absolute piece of shit. And that's the one I was driving my mom around in. Absolute POS. It looked like it had been barfed on by, King Kong, right? It was orange and yellow and brown and rust. And I mean, it just beat the shit, right, on the outside. But what I did was I took all the interior from the one I had bought and I took that out and I put it into the next one. So when you open up the door, it was like the Taj Mahal, but on the outside, it was beat to hell. Anyway, so she comes back. He's not there, so I'm taking her home. So she's giving me directions to her house, which is, you'd been there a million times as a child. And we get coming around the corner and the car stalls right down the street from her house. So being the trooper that your mother is, she swings the door open and says, "I'll push." And when she swings the door open, well, the car's still rolling and she wasn't. And it caught because the window came up, the window was down, and it caught her arm and nearly knocked her to the ground. And so that was my first, encounter with your mom. And so we managed to get back in the car, get it started, and then proceed down the street to her house. And this is where it all began. So we get there, and I'm going to drop her off, and she's like, "Want to come inside?" Sure. Went inside, talking, sat down on the couch for about T-2 seconds, and she pounced on me and laid a kiss on me and stole my heart right then and there. Boom. And we had a great adventure from there on through, junior and senior, really senior years for me and junior and senior year for her. So, and we were both into the music scene. By that time I was already, singing and playing in bands, and we both loved the same kind of music. We were both into rock. I mean, I think while I was more, diverse with the stuff that I grew up with my parents, I loved my rock. But your mom was big time into rock. She was a rocker, if ever there was one. And so anyhow, we had some great adventures, went to a lot of great concerts, stories I could tell you, just on and on. I mean, I remember one of the first shows we ever saw, we were at the San Jose Civic Auditorium, leaning on the stage, and Dave Mattichetti was 1.5 feet away, and Y&T was just blowing our heads off with the Earthshaker tour. And then during that show, I remember them playing Black Tiger, which was the forthcoming album, and just making our eyes melt. It was amazing. And she and I were right there, and she's just jumping and and we had a lot of fun. I mean, she kicked ass, and she was a lot of fun to do stuff with. And one of the things that we really dug together was music. So did a lot of that over the years. A lot of fun. So that's how we met.
So my I think my richest association with you, outside of obviously you being my father, is
there's that.
There's two things that I would associate with you. One I really identified with. The other not so much. But I always, like, as a youngster, I always thought of my dad as a soldier. Because
which I was at the time, yeah.
Yep, we lived in Fort Ord. Which,
speaking of which, I have a story to share about that, about you and your brother.
Yes, I would love to hear it. And then the other thing was a singer, and I think my early obsession and love of music obviously comes out of I think both you and Mom's love for music, and like that's where I first would derive probably most of my meaning was out of television and music,
right? And like as was the case with so many of us, especially during those years, and for me, that continued, to be an influence, throughout my life. I now that I'm older, I mean, I still love music and have a great appreciation for music of all genders, but I view it through a different lens today than I once did. Especially having toured around with, a successful Nashville artist and being behind the scenes and, seeing what goes on behind the curtain in the music industry itself. I mean, there's no greater high than singing in front of 20,000 people, except maybe singing in front of 100,000, and it's a natural high that one really can't explain. But having pulled back the curtain, if you will, I'm glad I never succeeded, because it's not a world I want to live in. It's just not, just like I wouldn't want to be a politician. I'm heavily steeped in history and politics, as you know, and it's rather ironic because it's the one topic I don't really breach too much in my books, except for where it was relevant and historical. And I never bring it up on any of my channels, and I mean, I've got I'm on 7 platforms right now with like 10,000 people. And I never, as much as, and me, the one thing we could sit here and talk all day and all night about politics and go down the rabbit hole in a whole lot of different directions and have a very interesting and enlightening conversation, and certainly leave the people, with food for thought. No doubt. But that's the one thing I never talk about on any of my platforms, because, it's just, I the way things are going today, I just know if I do that I'll be kicked off, and all the effort that I put into building, all the effort you put into building that platform goes away in the blink of an eye, because your constitutional rights are being violated because some douchebag in the Silicon Valley doesn't like what you're saying. And it's really unfortunate. And I hope that we can not only return to God, but return to our Constitution, because that is our nation's most precious document. And if people only took the time to, at least scan over it and get some kind of an inkling as to what it does for you, for us, for every citizen in this great nation, I don't think we'd be where we are today. But, I hope we return to that. I hope that they start talking about that in schools. And I hope that after all we're going through right now in our nation and around the world, quite frankly, that parents share this knowledge with their children. It's important. Just as important as it was for me to seek out the roots of our family, and find out, who we are and where we came from. It's just as important to understand the history and roots of your own nation, your own country, your home. And only then can one truly appreciate what they have, where they are, and how it got to be that way. And just like I said before, once I learned, all that I learned to write enough to write 4 novels, for crying out loud. Once I learned all that stuff, I was in that very same way enlightened, because that hole that you talked about, that empty space, had now been filled. And frankly, it continues to be filled every day because I'm always learning more, and having to go back and add stuff into the books I've yet to narrate. I'll go in and add things in that are pertinent and I think need to be shared. I'll add that into those novels because they haven't been narrated yet, so nobody's read them anyway. But anyway, yeah. Lost my train of thought, but anyway.
Doing a great job. Let's see. Tell me about what sent you off to the military?
Well, really a couple of things, frankly. And before I tell a story, one thing I want to add about the TV narrative was that I was the first generation to get Pong by Atari. The little ball on the screen. And we got one of the first ones because my mom worked at Atari and they gave her a prototype to test for the company before they released it for sale. And so just like you saw in the movies where back in the day, not everybody had a TV, they had radios, right? And the first time someone in the neighborhood got a TV, then all the other families in the neighborhood would come over and watch TV with that family, right? Because they were the only ones within miles that had a television, right? And so it was kind of the same way with the Pong, right? So all the neighborhood kids and everybody would come over. And it went on for years because my mom was there for quite a while, all the way through till they had the console. And then they sent the console home with the chip to put in where the cassette went. And we got to field test all the games before Atari released them. So being a kid during that time was a ton of fun.
Awesome. Wow. I never knew that.
Yeah. She was a documentation clerk at Atari for the R&D department. And She had great hand and eye coordination because they had machines there where they field tested stuff, and they had her try it out. And she was so good at it that they started sending her home with prototypes to try out and to give feedback on. And she would write up reports like, I like this, I don't like that, I wish it did that, that kind of thing.
Interesting.
Yeah, so we as kids got to play the hell out of them. And that was as much a part of the field testing as anything, because she not only got to field test it herself, but she got to see how we reacted to it and interacted with the game. So
what caused how did she meet Bill?
Oh wow. So again, we're just a few years after the divorce. And my best friend at the time was a fellow by the name of James Long, Jimmy. And Jimmy lived right across the street. And he lived there with his mother, Carol, and his stepfather. And forgive me, but I don't remember his name. It's been many years. So, one day, and Jimmy and I had been friends for years. And one day, my mom was outside, and she went over to see if Carol was home. And as she walked up the driveway, she heard a car running in the garage. And so she stood at the garage waiting, thinking, oh, they're coming out, right? But they never did. And so my mother knocked on the door. No one answered. And she ran back, called the police and fire department. They came and they found his Jimmy's stepfather had committed suicide. He had sat down in his car, started it up, and that was it. And so my mom found him, essentially. And so shortly thereafter, now Carol is a single mom with 2 sons. And shortly thereafter, Bill, her brother, arrives to help her out. And really, they're kind of helping each other out because he's going through a divorce or just finished a divorce in Washington. He's got all kinds of kids of his own. And so next thing you know, he's living with Carol. They're, supporting each other. And then my mom and Bill, through that relationship, got to know each other, and the rest is history. They started dating, and then they got married, and there you go. So that's how Bill came into the fray.
I really loved Bill. I really did.
He was a good guy. He had a rough life, but he I think all in all, he was a good guy. He taught me a lot. I mean, he taught me how to break down the engine on a car and put it back together again. We rebuilt the engines on a couple of different cars. The transmission, did a couple of trannies, swapped out a couple of trannies. Taught me how to, do crafts around the house, handyman stuff around the house, that kind of thing. Good guy. Got me one of my first jobs too, working at a gas station, where, by the way, I was held up at gunpoint. So yeah, Bill was a good dude, and he was good for my mom. And may they both rest in peace. But yeah, good guy, Bill. I have to say, and I mean this in the kindest of ways, but having lived with my mother, and I'll just say she wasn't the easiest person to live with. And so he was really a saint in many ways, because he just had this kindness about him, and he put up a lot of stuff he shouldn't. He had his moments, but he did put up he put up with a lot of my mom that he shouldn't have had to. But anyway,
I remember some of my early memories of them were in Manteca. And before they had the swimming pool.
Yeah.
I remember playing in the backyard when they started to dig that hole.
Yeah. He dug that fucking hole himself, I think.
Yeah, and I remember having like a little plastic shovel.
Yeah.
And so I remember that. And I remember that Papa, Holyfield, and Nana.
Yes.
I don't know if they lived with them at that time, but
at first. When you first started going there, they didn't. Not at first.
Right, but eventually they did.
Eventually they did. And what's interesting is, so Papa and Nana, Dutch or Whitey, my mother's father and mother, her name was Agnes or Aggie, and they still lived in the apartment complex that they owned in Walnut Creek. And they had, after my mother divorced my father, my mother, like I said, she took it really hard. And one of the byproducts of that was she just tapped out every ounce of equity from that house, and was upside down in a mortgage that had started out at only, I want to say 24, just shy of $25,000 at the time when they bought it in '69. And so when my dad and she divorced, my father, to his credit, he gave her everything except for his retirement, to include the house. Okay. Because he knew that the payment was only $250 a month, and a kid working at Jack in the Box could pay that mortgage. Right. So that was one of the things he signed over in that transaction. And unfortunately, she just exploited that. And as the house went up in value, of course, being in the Silicon Valley, as the Silicon Valley is blossoming, you can imagine what, the value of that home increase was from the 25,000 in '69 till now, we're in the 80s. And I was already out of the house at this point. I was already in the military and married to your mother. But they just kept tapping. I mean, I remember one day they showed up. They come driving up in matching brand new Ford Mustangs, a white one and a black one. And I thought to myself, where the hell did they get this money? Well, they were just tapping into the equity in the home and going overextending their debt. And so, in the end, they ended up losing it all. And so Papa Lewis went and he paid cash outright for the house and put it in a trust. So she couldn't tap into the equity anymore. And he let her live there. She and Bill lived there for free. And unfortunately, that kind of backfired too, because without having any responsibility to pay a rent or a mortgage, then that just meant pissing away more money on other things. And eventually they were right back where they started, overextended in all their debt. So my grandfather, and I think probably just because at that point he didn't want to deal with it anymore, he just kind of threw his hands up, and he allowed she and Bill, to sell that house in the Bay Area, which today is probably, I'm sure, worth at least $2 million. Right there in the heart of Silicon Valley. 4-bedroom, 2-bath, like 2,000 square foot, family room, living room, dining room, kitchen, decent sized backyard. Nice place. But he let them sell it. And then what they did was they paid off all the debt that they had. And then they came to Manteca, which is the house you were referencing, and bought that house. And then just ended up doing it all over again. They just didn't have any sense of finance or budget. And so, paying everything off was just enabling them, really. But yeah, that's the house you were talking about with the pool. And they ended up digging their own hole and putting a pool in and building the deck. I helped them with that project. That was actually a lot of fun to do. But then eventually they ended up losing that as well. They ended up in a beat to shit trailer out in the middle of nowhere in Northern California, and eventually couldn't afford to live there anymore because it was California, and then moved on to Washington where it was cheaper, again in another trailer, and that's where they lived out the rest of their days. I never went to see them there. I never saw my mother again after she left California.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't either. I saw Bill very briefly before he passed.
Yeah.
My
mom had already passed just before a little before that, right?
Yes, she passed. I think she passed while we were in midair.
Yeah, because I seem to recall the two of you were trying to get there to see her while she was still with us.
Yes.
Yeah, rather tumult time.
That particular trip actually is detrimental, or pivotal, or
pivotal. How so?
It was pivotal for me because when we got out there, Papa Bill looked like shit.
Hmm.
And
well, last I had heard, he was bedridden.
Yes.
And so, yeah.
So
I can only imagine.
The reason why it was so pivotal was kind of back to what we talked about in the very, very beginning of this conversation.
The separation of family issue.
It was like, wow, we're flying out to Washington to go visit my grandmother, who I haven't seen in
forever,
a half a decade,
right?
At least,
yeah,
probably more.
Probably more, I'd say, if I were to guess.
I think it was more, and yeah, because I hadn't seen him since Manteca.
Right, when you lived with me in that 2-story.
Yeah.
On Crestwood, and they lived right around the block.
Yes.
10 houses away.
Yes.
My mom used to come down And we'd be partying or something like that, and my mom would come and knock on the door. And my mom, I loved her, but man, if you were having guests over and maybe having a gathering or whatever, she was the kind of gal that she'd come in and she would just talk, 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 and you couldn't get her to shut up. And my friends weren't necessarily too much into my mom, if you know what I mean. So we would hide behind the door, like felt so guilty. Tony,
Yeah.
are you there? They're like, oh, Mom, I love you, but please just go home. I mean, living 10 houses down can be a blessing, but it can also be a curse.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
So it was pivotal because we had flown out to Washington to call
with no knowledge of her passing at that point.
Because she died while we were in the air.
While you were in flight, that's what I'm saying. You're going there with the anticipation of actually getting we're actually going to get to do this. We're actually going to make it. We're going to see her, and then you find out.
And so the days leading up to it, and talking with her, she was terrified of dying.
Yeah, I know.
And she was terrified.
I know she was.
And she was vocal about her fears around that. And
yeah, when I spoke with her, that is exactly the message that I received, and it was really quite sad because not being, feeling her pain, but feeling hopeless to do anything about it. And knowing that there was nothing I could do. I mean, she had stomach cancer. She knew she was dying. There were no options for, saving her life. She was going to die, and she knew it. And when we spoke, that really came through. And so it was a tough time, very tough time. And like I say, the hardest thing is having somebody that you love and then knowing that, you're at a loss to change the outcome.
Yes. And so it was the fear, it was hearing that fear and heading out there and an image in my mind of that happening to me, of growing to an age, living in a distant land from the rest of my family,
like we do now.
Yes, and essentially dying alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that I must say I was really happy about my father moving here to where I live in Texas, just a mile away, for the last years of his life. And we really made the most of that time together. And I'm really grateful for that. So, but I understand exactly where you're coming from, because I think about that sometimes myself, because I live here and you and Mike live there, and your sister's in Germany, your other brother's in California. You know what I mean? It's like, it's something that does pass through one's mind. That's what makes moments like this, or even when we just talk on the phone, so especially even if we're just shooting the shit about whatever, it doesn't matter. Just having that connection and staying in touch, and and being there when I get the message, with the picture of the things that you sent me and whatnot, and so on and so forth, and being able to be included in that. That's a privilege, and I'm honored by that, but overjoyed by it too. Being just knowing what I know, and looking forward to what the future holds. So
and so and Anne went out there with me. It was I think it was Olympia.
Yes, that's right.
Washington, which is very interesting because I'll be going out there in September.
Really?
Yes.
Let me ask you a question. While you were there, did you ever experience any of the artesian wells?
No.
Okay, so you're going back now, and I would say to you, son, While in Olympia, you absolutely must experience the natural artesian wells. And they are these wells that are all over the place alongside the road where this natural artesian water bubbles up from within the earth, and it's ice cold. And it's the most refreshing drink of water you will ever experience. It's really fascinating. But it's a constant flow of this water circulating. It's quite amazing. Olympia, Washington. Hence the beer, Olympia beer.
Interesting.
The water. Yeah, it's the water.
I'll try and keep that in mind. Yeah, we'll be going out there. There's some friends of mine in the corner of the internet here are a conference out there, and so that'll be good.
Cool.
But that was a pivotal moment because sat there, talked with
excuse me.
It's okay. And Ann and I sat there with Aunt Lexi and Angela and Jessica and
my niece.
Papa Bill is over in the bedroom, sleeping.
Right.
And I just thought, I'm in a moment in my life where things are growing and growing and growing, and Ann and I weren't married at that time yet.
Right.
And it was like, things have to. We should grow our life together, and I want to commit to that. And it wasn't long after that I would propose to Anne.
Right.
And,
what a grand proposal it was, I might add.
Yes, sir. And so that trip was very pivotal and integral to that moment.
Sure. That's actually quite beautiful if you think about it. It brought you to a place in your thinking where you changed directions a little bit and sought a different path, and very much is the path you follow to this day. It's quite beautiful, really. But I find that fascinating that was the pivotal moment, the aha moment, if you will. That event is what brought you to that place. Yeah. It's a great story. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. And it's not something that we've talked a lot about. I've always felt that might be a sore subject a little bit. So just in that, it just wasn't, it just never really came up. How about that? That's the way of putting it.
What never came up?
Oh, that talking about this particular story.
Oh, yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Lost you for a second. I'm back. I'm back now. Don't you worry. I've not lost you. I'm still here.
So what sent you to the military?
The military, yes. Well, several things, really. So being a kid in the Scouts, Cub Scouts, and then Weeblos, and then Boy Scouts, believe it or not, as a little, and then my father being a police officer and a former military man himself, he was in the Coast Guard. And then again, growing up in the culture, where at the time there was all these, World War II movies and the Green Berets, the Vietnam movies and all that. And it was so glamorized that, you wanted to, it was almost like a recruiting method, and it made you want to be a part of that. And so I can remember thinking to myself, even as a little boy, that after Boy Scouts comes the Army. It's just the natural progression, and then your mother got pregnant, and it was like I was working, and your mom got pregnant, and it was like, well, I need, better health care because now I got a son or a daughter coming, one of the two. Yeah, and so I just went down to the recruiter's office and signed up, because Uncle Sam was going to give me all the health care I wanted, needed, plus a job, and teach me some skills. And like I said, I'd always thought to myself that that's where I wanted to be. So that's what I did. And the funny thing was, at that particular moment in my life, I had put on a ton of weight. I was a big-time stoner. I was smoking dope all the time and munching out like crazy. Prior to that, I'd always been an athlete. But I had kind of a I don't give a shit attitude. And so, you know, I was playing my music, I was rocking, I was getting high and writing music and songs and partying and munching. And I put on a bunch of weight. I was like 260 pounds from like 190, you know. And so I went down to the recruiting office and took my stepbrother, Bill's son, Henry, and he enlisted. And while I took him there to enlist, and while I was there, I was talking with him. But I was thinking, man, I'm so out of shape, you know, this ain't gonna happen, you know. And plus, I knew I'd been smoking pot, and they were gonna piss test me. And this guy was smart, Staff Sergeant Simpson, who actually was at our wedding and other family events. He was there when you were born. My recruiting sergeant, recruiting NCO, and great guy. Really had great respect for him. Anyhow, he and I started talking when he was done with Henry, and he's like, "Dude, I know." Basically, you know, I'm paraphrasing here. You know, dude, I know you're a dope smoking, you know, rock singing, you know, stoner, you know, who's fat and out of shape. But don't worry, we can take care of that. You know, type of a thing. And so, he, you know, basically he said, you know, you quit smoking dope for 3 months or whatever, and stop munching out, and you know, come back and see me. So I stopped smoking, went back and saw him, but I was still a fat ass 260 pounds, right? So, long story short, he finagled something in for the weight requirements, and I went in it and signed up, and a short while later, I what they call I depped in. So I became a member of the United States Army on 17 November 1982, and then in 9 February 1983, a few months later, I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and did my basic training. So while I was at basic training, your mother was home pregnant with you. And I think, I don't remember for sure, but I think she was living at my mom and Bill's house during that time. And so, and of course, your grandmother, Carolyn, was right there. And she was amazing. God rest her soul. Amazing woman. And David, too. But anyway, so I went off to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And so I'll tell you a little story. So I get there. Now, your mom and I had just seen movies like An Officer and a Gentleman and the very first Rambo, and another little movie with Bill Murray called Stripes. And as I've already indicated, this is the kind of stuff I grew up watching. I was always very patriotic, and I was always just kind of, I was raised in that kind of, you know, those kind of movie environments. So where I'm watching, this was my genre. So anyhow, I get to Fort Knox in February from California. It is colder than hell. I mean, freezing ass cold. And I'm wearing California clothes, right? So I get to the reception station. Let me back up. I arrive at Atlanta, Georgia. Then they put us on a plane to Augusta, Georgia, where they hold the Masters. And when I get to Augusta, Georgia, I shit you not, there's no terminal or anything, just a stairway they roll up and you climb down the stairs. That's how it was back then. And so then we get on a bus. We go that takes us to Fort Knox. We get there to the reception station, and they line us all up. And the first thing they do is they have us drop our shit in place, and they march us over, basically walk us, because we didn't know how to march yet. Walk us over to the mess hall, and it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, right? I had, when I first, before we flew out, we had stayed in Oakland at at the station there, which is a transfer station. And anyhow, so we got on a plane in Oakland and flew out, and here we are. And the first thing we do is they take us to the mess hall and they feed us a steak dinner.
Those bastards.
fucking amazing. I mean, we were all starving because, like I said, it was 1 o'clock in the morning. We'd all been traveling all day. They didn't have shit in Oakland. And there's a story I could tell you about that night too. Oh boy. But so we get there. The first thing you do is they feed us a steak dinner, first meal in the military. So anyway, we're there for a couple of weeks and waiting for our class to begin in boot camp. And so we're at the reception station, and one of the first things they tell us, the sergeants tell us when we go into the barracks, they lock us all up in front of our bunks, and you've seen the movies, you know what I'm talking about. And mind you, we all still have long hair. We're still wearing civilian clothing. You know, we're just a bunch of guys off the block, but they've got us locked up in front of these bunks. And they proceed to tell us that this building was the building that was used to film the movie Stripes. So do not fuck up my building. I love this building. This building has sentimental value to me. And if any of you swinging dicks fucks up my building, you're going to catch hell. That kind of thing. And so we're like, what am I getting myself into here? And anyway, so a few more days went by, and I ended up catching pneumonia. And all we were doing during this time anyway was shooting pool in the pool hall and waiting for our orders to come through and smoking cigarettes. And so I started not feeling well, and I ran out of cigarettes, and I didn't bring any money to buy new ones because I thought I was going to basic training right away. And so I ended up bumming some from other guys. And this was my first introduction really into Newports and Cool Filter Kings, which was the primary cigarette at the time. So those smoking those menthols, I went from a Marlboro Red to that, right? And that got my throat, and then boom, I had pneumonia, and that was it. So one morning I go out, and I could barely walk, and I make my way out to formation. We're still in civilian clothes. We got no coats, no nothing, in the friggin' snow, okay? And they ask, does anybody need to go to sick call? So sergeant tells me, okay, here's your pass. Go out to this street, hang a left, and keep walking. You'll know it when you get there. It's a big fucking building. If you get lost, don't come back. We'll see you in Leavenworth. And that was it. I mean, and I was a walking dead. Literally. And so, okay, so off I go. And this place is like 5 freaking miles from the reception station. And my fat ass is walking in shitty shoes, soaking wet to the bone, right? Because there's snow everywhere, And so I get there. It's still early in the morning. And walk up. They point. They tell me to go sit and wait. So I give them my paper. I go and I sit and I wait. This is in the morning. We haven't even had breakfast yet. We're just like, before 8 o'clock, right? After walking there. So I sit and 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 I sit some more. Finally, hours go by. I mean, hours. And I'm like, feeling like shit. I haven't eaten. I'm thirsty. And this woman comes out in uniform. I forget her rank. A nurse, I'm guessing. And she calls off names and says, following names. So if I call your name, stand up and follow me. So there you go. She calls her names and we follow her. And we follow her. And we keep following her. And then we follow her some more until finally we're at a big steel door. And she pushes it open and opens it up. It's like the ones at school, they have the bar right across it. She opens the door, swings it open, and we're looking outside. And it's friggin' dark. Pitch black out. That's how many hours I'd been sitting waiting to get medical help. Okay? And so we walk outside, we follow her out, and she takes us out to a Huey helicopter. They hand us ear protection. and tell us to climb on board. That's what we do. And keep your head down, or you may have more than pneumonia. So go out, we climb in, we get this thing, they close it up, and they're yelling at us, "It's gonna be loud." I mean, and this thing's, we're like, no shit, and even with the ear protection on, it's loud as a son of a bitch. So I guess this is what we do when we go on sick call. We get in helicopters and fly away 8 or 9 hours later in the middle of the night. And so off we fly. Well, come to find out, the division that's based in Fort Knox is in the middle of what they call a division war, a fake war. So everyone, all the hospital staff, they're set up in a MASH unit, a field hospital. So that's where they were flying us to and simulating as if we were wounded soldiers coming in from war, right? So really, really cool. So we're flying out there and we get about, I'd say, halfway there. And like I said, it is absolutely pitch black because it's February in Kentucky and it's winter. It's cold as hell, and it is pitch black. And all of a sudden, we see these rockets. And then machine gun fire. And what we were seeing were the tracer rounds, which is like every third or fifth round, right? Firing from an Apache helicopter. And what it was we were flying through this area, and in the distance in front of us, these Apache helicopters were down in the trees, and then they were popping up. Then they'd rotate. And then fire off a rocket, and then back and forth. And so this was my first real exposure to being in the military, were these two Apache helicopters in the middle of pitch black like that. It was absolutely fascinating. So anyway, I ended up going to field hospital. I was treated by a full bird colonel who slipped me an ice cold Pepsi every chance he got. Guy was really awesome, great guy. Never forget it. Left me with a great first impression of the military. I got better. Oh, while I'm there, to eat, you had to remember you're supposedly in a fake war zone, right? So you still had to get your ass out of bed and walk out to the mess hall tent, which wasn't a tent at all. It was just set up outside, and you went by. They slopped the food in your tray as you went, and then you went and ate and brought back your tray, and it was kind of crazy, but surprisingly good food. I mean, I started off with steak, and next thing I know, I'm eating sausage and eggs and bacon and freaking everything else. I mean, they fed us good in the Army, I'll tell you. It was the Reagan administration. Reagan took care of the military. So anyway, this colonel, he took care of me, got me healed, and I eventually wind up flying back in the helicopter, and then ending up back in the reception station like a week or so, 10 days later. And that was really eye-opening, living in my first 10 days in the military, really living in a GP large military medical tent in downrange in the middle of the Kentucky forest. Fantastic. And so I ended up back in the reception area, and of course at that point I had already missed my class. The guys that I arrived with, that I had orders to join in boot camp, had already gone too far into the training for me to jump in and catch up. So I got held over in the reception area a little while longer, and then joined the next class and went through. And that was a fascinating experience. Bill's son, oldest son, who was a sergeant in the Army when I went in, told me, "Look, this is all just a head game. And as long as you remember that and don't let it get to you, you're going to be fine." And he was right. And I mean, I breezed through boot camp. I mean, I was a squad leader like day one, and stayed a squad leader throughout the entirety of my boot camp. But just a fascinating experience, and I would recommend to anybody who's never done it to do it, because I loved it. I really did. You learn so much, and the camaraderie, the esprit de corps is like nothing you'll ever experience. Not even in sports teams. I mean, you get a little bit of that there, but let's face it, when you're with a group of people who your life depends on, standing to your left and right, it's a whole different animal, and that's the way it was. So anyway, graduated boot camp, and I was supposed to go initially with my original orders, which of course had to be altered because I missed my first window. They had me going straight to advanced training, where I was going to go to communication school to become what they call a RAT, radio teletype operator. So I handled secure comms for like the artillery and things like that during time of war. So anyway, but with the altered orders, the timing had all been thrown off. So there was a whole week before the communication school training began. So without even telling anybody, I bought a ticket. I jumped on a plane, flew to. One thing before I get into that. Right before we graduated, the drill instructors gave 3 of us a 24-hour pass before graduation from boot camp to leave post to go do whatever we want. And so the 3 of us went to Churchill Downs, where they hold the Kentucky Derby. And there's a hotel there, 5-star. We got one room, shared it between the 3 of us, sleeping on the floor and whatnot. And then that night, REO Speedwagon was playing in the auditorium on the grounds at Churchill Downs with a local band called Duke Jupiter, which, by the way, they kicked ass. And so the 3 of us went over to this concert. Now, mind you, we're still in boot camp, so we do not have civilian clothes. All we have are our Class A dress greens and combat boots. So he and I, myself and the other 2 guys, we go waltzing into this REO Speedwagon concert dressed to the nines in our uniforms with bloused boots and the whole 9 yards, looking like we're ready for inspection. But that was really cool. So we did the show, and then the next day we were back in boot camp, and then we graduated. But again, so there was that 1 week period where I had to wait for school to start. So I went on leave and came home. I grabbed a ticket, flew to the San Francisco airport, SFO. And when I got off the plane, I walked out. Of course, things were all different back then. But I had my duffel bag and my civilian bag that I went with. And I come walking out the doors at SFO, and cars are whizzing by. And the next lane over is a bus lane where all the buses can park. And in between the front and rear of these 2 buses, there's a space of about 4 feet. And this guy comes pulling up, comes to a screeching halt with his passenger window down in a limousine. And he turns to me and he shouts, "You need a ride?" And I went running across the street through the traffic with my duffel bag and shit. Of course, at that point, I was like a world-class athlete after having gone through boot camp. I mean, so I make my way over there, and I'm like, "Dude, I don't have any money. I only got, a few bucks or whatever." And he goes, because I told him my story. "I'm coming home. My wife's pregnant. She doesn't know I'm coming, and I'm going to surprise her, and so I just need to get to Milpitas." And he goes, "Milpitas?" Yeah, shit. I guess I'm taking the night off. So he goes, "Jump in." Before I know it, he grabs my bags, has them in the trunk. And I start to get in the bag. He goes, "Screw that. Come right up front with me." All right. So here we are, this guy and I, Italian fellow, good looking dude too. Real handsome, debonair guy. You can tell this guy making a lot of money with this limousine, right? And so we get to talking and shucking and jiving, having a great conversation, driving the little over an hour, hour and a half to Milpitas, where my bonnie bride awaits. And so we get a little over halfway there, probably 2/3 the way there. And he pulls off the freeway. He says, "I'll be right back." He runs in. He grabs a bottle of champagne and some flowers. And he comes, because I didn't have a pot to piss in or when to throw it out. I mean, I had a few bucks, but that was it, you know. I thought I was going to have Bill come pick me up. Surprise. You know. And so this guy was really a savior. You know, like God put him there. And so he comes back with the flowers and the champagne. He goes, "You can't go home without this for your expecting wife." And really just a great guy. So he takes me. We come pulling up a short while later in front of my mom and Bill's house where I grew up. And he pulls up in front, stops. He says, "Climb, open the door and go to the back and then climb into the back." And, all right. And he looks through the pass-through window. "I'm just going to lay on the horn here. And when they come out to see what the fuck's going on, you get to do your thing." Cool. So he lays on the horn and he's just pissing off the whole fucking neighborhood. I mean, this big old long stretch Cadillac pimp ass limousine. I mean, for its day, it was tits. And so he's laying on this horn. And of course, my mom is not one to put up with that shit. So she comes out and she's ready to rip someone's head off and shit down their throat, you know. And of course, right alongside her is Bill. And of course, being the curious soul that she is, my bonnie bride comes, you know, waltzing out there too, sticking out all the way out to here. I mean, she's ready to, you're almost ready to come. You know what I mean? You're ready to say hello to the world at this point. And so she comes out. As soon as she came out, I swung open the door and I stood up with my arms open. Surprise. And wow. That was my great return and my surprise for your mom, who was very, very close to giving birth at the time. So anyway, spent the week with her. It was wonderful. And then right back to advanced individual training, which was in Fort Gordon, Georgia, which is where I landed in Augusta. And so went to school there. Again, went through communication school, and it was really, but it was also different from the standpoint that I was now experiencing things in the military that I hadn't before, because everything is so strict and regimented in boot camp. You never leave, you know, the sight of your drill sergeants. You're always in the barracks. You know, you don't. The only time you go to the little mini store to get anything is when the drill sergeants feel like they're in the mood to march the whole group down and back. So there's no freedom, you know. Now at advanced training at Fort Gordon, now I'm walking around the post. I'm going for, you know, friggin' 5-mile runs through the forest of Georgia, you know, whenever I want to. And, you know, and back then I went, oh, by the way, I went from 260 pounds to 190 in boot camp. I mean, that was a complete transformation. Matter of fact, I think when your mom saw me get out of the limo, she kind of looked at me like a second time, you know, like double take, because I looked so different. I had shed so much weight, you know, 70 pounds. So kind of crazy. But so anyway, I do advanced training, and like I'm going to the movie theaters at Fort Gordon, Georgia. And the thing is, when you go to a movie at a military installation, before the movie starts, they play you say the Pledge of Allegiance, and you stand and you salute and you sing the national anthem, and then you sit down and you watch the movie. So, you know, that was like my first real taste of that culture. And I really loved it. I mean, it was such a sense of pride and patriotism that had always been a part of me, but it was like, this was like affirmation that this is who I am, you know? And so, and then, like, you know, walking around on post, if you're walking around at post, say at 5 p.m. and you hear the bugles playing taps, Well, you stop, you turn to the flag, and you salute. And you wait till taps is played, and then you know, and you proceed, you go about your business. So just a really interesting time, being exposed to this part of the military that I had yet to see, really. So anyway, and we had freedom in that school. It wasn't in lockdown like it was in Boot. So it was Georgia. It was summertime, and so like on 4th of July, two buddies and I, actually three buddies and I, jumped into a Jeep. These two guys went in on the buddy program from Colorado, and they had driven their Jeep from Colorado to Fort Gordon. So they had their POV, their privately owned vehicle, with them. And so the two of them and myself and another fella on 4th of July, we were given a weekend pass. So we jumped in the Jeep and went from Fort Gordon, Georgia, and drove all the way down to Daytona Beach, Florida. And cruised up and down. In Florida, you could drive on the beaches, which you really can't do in California. So even though I was a California kid and grew up on the beach, this was a whole new experience. So, and it was interesting. Talk about a whole new experience. So we're driving down there, and we didn't get off till 1700. We weren't dismissed from formation on Friday night until 1700. And so it was already later in the day by the time we were given our freedom to do what we want to do. So we got changed. We jumped in the Jeep and hauled ass, but we were just tired. I mean, we got so far down and before we got to short of Daytona Beach. And one of the guys is like, dude, we got to pull over. I got to get some sleep. We'll finish in the morning. Okay. We're in a friggin' Jeep in a rest area in Florida. Okay. Now, being the dumbass Californian that I am, hello, I take my Army issued blanket. Oh, yeah, the wool one. Yeah, that one. And I proceed to waltz on over to what I perceive as being a real comfy spot on the grass. And my buddy, well, he's an idiot from New York City. So we're like, it's cool. And the other two guys, they stayed in the Jeep. They propped back the seats and they slept right there, right? Well, I don't know. I couldn't honestly tell you what time of the morning it was, but at the dawn's early light, if you will, I wake up covered with dew. The humidity is just crazy, right? And kind of just, roll over, sleepy-eyed, and what do I see? Well, yeah, and a big fucking alligator at that. A huge ass alligator. And I'm like, holy shit, It is kind of funny because when you come out of basic training, you feel like Superman. You feel like it can overcome anything. But I'm not going to lie, when you wake up and see a friggin' alligator like 10 feet away, yeah, you shart a little, okay? Just a little. Just a little. And I'm 60 now, so I can admit it. But yeah, and so I'm like, to my buddy, like, what the fuck? And I'm like, dude, and I grab him, like, shut the fuck up and stand up slow. And he looks up, holy fuck, dude, what the fucking alligator do? And he's freaking the fuck out. I mean, this guy's from New York City. At least in California, I grew up in the woods. I've been around wild animals and shit. This guy, he come from the block, okay? And so this was freaking him out. And I'm like, it's all cool. Just back away. But know this, they are fucking fast. So we step back and we get back to the Jeep. And meanwhile, the guys in the Jeep have kind of heard us and they're waking up. And as soon as we got to the Jeep, they were already in place, seatbelts on, and starting the Jeep. True story. And we got the hell out of Dodge and went to Daytona Beach and had a great time. And kind of funny because I mentioned Y&T earlier, which was, for those who don't know, Y&T is from the San Francisco Bay Area. They were pretty big. They weren't KISS, but they were fairly successful and still tour to this day, though. The last remaining member is Dave Manichetti, the lead vocalist and lead guitarist. But anyway, at that time, they were still spreading their brand. And while they were big in a lot of parts of the country and around the world, especially in Japan, they hadn't really heard of them in Florida, to my surprise. We didn't have the internet back then. So, you only got exposure over stuff over the radio, and if they didn't play it, you didn't hear it. Right. And so the guys and I, we got a shitty little room in this shitty little building at this shitty little hotel. I mean, I'm telling you, it's a place you didn't want to stay, but we put all our coins together. We got this one room to have a safe place to sleep, that kind of deal. And then we got the hell out of there. Well, so we head across the street, and that's where all the big hotels are. And Richard Petty has a hotel there, or he did at the time, on the Strip. And on the back side of the hotel, facing the ocean, where there's a massive beach in the beautiful Atlantic, he has this huge pool area and bar. Okay. And so we went and hung out there. I mean, what the hell? We can swim. We can grab a couple of beers, grab some food if we want, because they had like bar food was really cheap. It was a great way to go when you were, when you were on a tight budget. So, and so we're having a great time and whatnot. And I had brought with me a cassette of Y&T's Earthshaker album, their first big album. And so they had a DJ out there, and I walked over to him and I asked him if he'd play it. And so he started playing it, and he kept playing it, and he kept playing it. And he played that whole CD song, and people were like, play that one. What's that? I never heard that before. They were just hungry. And so that's all he played the rest of the friggin' afternoon, with a variety of mixed up Y&T songs from the Earthshaker album. I never got that CD back, or that cassette back, by the way. Never did. Never saw it again. So anyway, graduated from signal school, went back home to your mom, and we then had orders to go to the 7th Infantry Division at Fort Ord, California, which just happened to be a little over an hour and a half away from where we grew up. So that's when we lived in Salinas. You said you seem to recall there was a period of time. So our first apartment together, living together ever, was in this little apartment in Salinas. And it was our first time. So it was a really neat experience. It was a growing experience. Being your own man and woman, husband and wife, hold on. I digress. Forgive me. Please forgive me. While I'm still at signal school, I told you we went on 4th of July. Okay, well, before that, on June 12th, actually, those same guys and I went into town, into Augusta, and got a hotel room in Augusta so we could use the swimming pool and swim because it was so friggin' hot, right? So we went there, and that night we had planned on going. Right next door was a restaurant bar where we were going to go eat and grab some beers. Well, I started not feeling really well. And I started getting these incredible abdominal pains. I mean, the likes of which I have never experienced before or since. And I says, guys, I can't hang, man. I ain't doing it. I need to lay down. And so like, whatever, fuck it. That's the way guys are. And so they took off and left me there by myself in this hotel room. And all I remember was this excruciating pain, and then waking up the next morning on the floor of the bathroom in the fetal position. And mind you, I hadn't had a single drop of alcohol. And the guys said that they came in and found me there. They just left me. They didn't know what was wrong. Bunch of idiots, young kids we were. So they just left me there. But when I woke up, I was like, I felt like $1,000,000. It was like, whoo, man, what happened? I don't know, but I feel great now. All right, what's next? And they're like, well, we're going into town to the mall and we're going to see a movie. Okay, fuck it, let's go. So we all get dressed, pile in the Jeep, and off we go. Well, before going in to buy into the theater before buying tickets or any of that shit. I'm walking through this mall and I see a payphone. You know, it's one of those things you put money in and can make telephone calls. Yeah, one of those. And well, I didn't do that. I made a collect call and to home to talk to your mom, to check on her, to see how she was, because I checked on her almost every day, right? And so Bill answers the phone because she was still living with my mom and Bill at the time. And anyway, he says, "Tony, we're a dad. You're a dad. It's a boy. He's a boy." You know, and he's sharing the news. I'm like, what? Where's Berta? She's at the hospital, you dumb shit. She just had your son. She had your baby. You know. And then he tells me now, be calm. There are some issues that we need to work through and I need to tell you about, but it's going to be okay. Everything's well in hand. Just, we've already reached out to your unit. The Army's looking for you. They said you were on weekend pass. They've already cut orders so that you can come TDY, temporary duty, or pardon me, emergency leave to come home to be with Roberta because your son was born. So I come with, and I start yelling, "I'm a dad! I'm a dad! I have a son! I have a son!" I'm screaming this at the top of my lungs in this mall in the middle of, you know, Georgia, right? And at the like 50 yards away, my buddy is who I'm with is on another payphone, and he starts yelling, "I'm an uncle! I'm an uncle! My sister just had a baby!" And we're doing this thing, and we come running up. "I'm a dad! I'm an uncle! Oh shit! We got to get out of here! So let's go!" And so we all jumped in the Jeep, headed back to post. And next thing I know, I'm on a flight home, and I get to California. I walk into the hospital. I walk in the door, and right there to my left is my Bonnie bride and my beautiful baby boy. So great moment. I can see that moment like it just happened 5 minutes ago.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I know it was. It's truly, you know, and your mom just glowing, you know, when she saw my reaction, you know. And she told me there that she was a little apprehensive. She wasn't sure how or what to expect or how to, you know, I would respond to the issues that we needed to address. And I just couldn't be happier, you know. And the doctor was there, and everybody told me what was going on, why, when, where, and how. And she just lit up, you know. She just started to glow, you know, like, "Oh, everything's going to be fine. Yeah, everything's going to be great." And she was beautiful. You were beautiful. And it's quite amazing, really. So, and then after that, of course, I went back, graduated signal school, and then we ended up at Fort Ord, where we lived in Salinas in that first apartment, where you were. That was your first home. You were a baby there. And I remember setting up the crib and changing tables and bassinets and all that stuff, you know, which you will hopefully someday get to experience. And shortly after living there, we moved. But while we were living there, it was kind of neat because we didn't have any furniture, right? And there was this furniture store down the block, literally down the street, and we would drive by it all the time and look and see in the windows all the cool furniture and think, "Wow, it sure would be nice to have furniture," you know. But we were dirt poor. I mean, I was a private. She was still trying to find a job as a hair cutter at that time. And so anyway, but she got to working, and together we started saving money, and we used to walk down to that furniture store, and we'd see an item that we liked, and we'd buy it, and then we'd carry it back to the apartment because we couldn't afford the delivery charges. And sometimes we'd have friends, some of my buddies from my unit would come and help us carry stuff, you know. Yeah, like I remember we had when we got this glass top kitchen table, wood frame, glass top, real cool, beautiful piece with 6 chairs, and we had to make like 4 or 5 trips, because it was like first the table, okay, go back. All right, 2 chairs. It was fun. Good memories. And so after we lived there for a short while, we where did we go from there? I think from there was when we went to Fort Ord, if I'm not mistaken.
Now, I know you're not going to believe this, but there are things about Fort Ord I remember specifically. I remember my bedroom.
I
remember, and here's how, tell me if I'm off on this.
Okay. Fire away.
What I remember about my bedroom, we used to have a lot of those baseball pennant triangular things.
Yep.
Tons of those in there. I remember I had there must have been some sort of black and white television in the bedroom itself. A little.
Yeah, 12-inch.
I remember I had a pair of boots, cowboy boots that Papa Lewis must have got me.
Yeah.
A little pair of those.
Yeah.
What else do I know about this place?
Well, I tell you used to love when I mowed the lawn.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I would mow the lawn, your mom and I got you one of those bubble mowers.
Yes.
And you would follow me along with the bubble mower.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And pretend to mow the lawn, and bubbles would be flying all over the yard and all that kind of stuff. Good stuff.
I remember one time, what else? I remember we had to move out of there, and when we ended up moving out, there was the ants were really, really bad, and I remember there being like bug spray.
It wasn't ants. It was cockroaches.
Oh shit!
Yeah. So we lived there for a couple of years, and matter of fact, Michael was born while we lived in that, and it was a duplex. And the first year or so that we lived there, it was fine. We didn't have any problems whatsoever. And but then a family moved in next door and brought them with us, and it was no surprise because they were absolutely filthy people. How they could be in the military is beyond me, because if you're in the military, your shit's dressed right, everything's clean, and the closest I can come to figuring it out was that it's like the plumber who never does the plumbing on his own house. So this individual does what he has to do or she has to do at work in the military, but when they come home, it's like, fuck it, and it was horrible. We were invaded by cockroaches. And let me preface that by saying the reason that we moved from that apartment in Salinas was because it became infested with cockroaches. When we first moved there, everything was fine, and then all of a sudden, Cockroach City. And we learned that they had come from a unit next door. A guy had come from Germany. He had permanent change of station from Germany to Fort Ord to 7th ID Light. And so he brought him with him in his bags. And it was in his furniture and his electronics, all that shit. So next thing you know, our place was infested. We had to take everything out of that apartment, one item at a time, take apart the TVs, the radios, the VCRs, all that shit, clean them out, and get rid of the cockroaches. And it worked. And so when we got to Fort Ord, we didn't have that problem again. And as soon as we started popping up again, I'm like, oh shit. So that's why we had to move out of there.
This is why, like, when people say that your memories of the past are clouded or whatever, I think, yeah, probably a lot. But I know that there's no way that you or my mom have never told me these stories.
Oh, wow.
So I'm
glad we're having this conversation then.
Well, what I'm saying is like, I know I remember that this happened. So you're just clarifying it. So
right.
Because I remember the toaster being taken apart and like stuff
That's
being
funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Everything. It was horrible. And we had to do it twice. It was terrible. But before we moved out of that place, one memory that I would like to share is it was right before we moved too. You were 4 and Michael was 2, as I recall. Right around the same time I took you to that game, that baseball game that I was sharing with you. And so I was out in the back doing work around the house, and you and Mike there was like a small forest behind the house, and the houses all just went around the edge, and everything in between was trees and bushes and shrubs and whatnot, and basically natural landscape. And so I used to let you guys go and play over there because I felt you were perfectly safe. You're surrounded by soldiers, And so, and there were other kids playing and stuff too. And so you guys were out there playing, having a good time. And this one little girl, she's the stereotypical bitch in training, we'll say. And she came along and started picking on you. And you were tall and lanky, but you weren't a big guy. You were tall and lanky. You were thin. The wind would blow and knock you over back in those days. Whereas Mike was even at 2 was a friggin' tank. He was like all yoked up and everything, even at 2, walking around like this and shit. And he still walks like that today, which is funny. But I mean, that's just who he was. But so this gal starts picking on you, and she's older and bigger than you. And I stood back and just watched, right? And it went on for a little bit, and I was thinking about intervening, and you were pretty much holding your own, but she was getting really nasty. Then she started to shove you. And Mike walks over. Hey, leave my big brother alone. Right? And he walks up to this broad and, gives her a shove. Leave my big brother alone. And she's looking at him like, what the hell? And Mike just tenacious, right? I mean, he wouldn't put up with that shit. And so he pushed her, and I go, okay. I had to break it up before he beat the crap out of her. And then I got to answer to the first sergeant about why the hell my kids are beating the shit out of other kids, And so I'll never forget that moment. And the two of you walked away proud, like, yeah, we're the Albin brothers. Fuck you.
That's clever. Very interesting. Okay, where do we go from here? Well, I mean, we're already 3 hours. Holy cannoli, 3 hours in. So how has it been as a storyteller for you writing these books?
Well, I was always, as I mentioned, I was in bands and was really into music, and I love to pen lyrics. And I mean, you and I had the gift of penning a song together right after we watched the Twin Towers come down on 9/11. Shortly thereafter, within days of that, as I recall. So, I've always enjoyed writing, but it had always been, for the most part anyway, in the arena of lyrics and poetry, and had never been a storyteller per se. But I've always enjoyed, writing. Just enjoyed the activity of writing and the creativity of it, if you will. And so, I was also always one of those guys who said to himself, yeah, someday I'm going to write a book, or I need to write a book about this, or whatever, but also one of those guys that never did shit about it. Never had the time. I was raising kids or doing this or doing that. It just wasn't in the cards. But it had always been something I had said that I would like to do. And so when the opportunity presented itself, by the grace of my wife, really, Mary, it was really a no-brainer to take advantage of that opportunity and make the most of it, the very most of it. And how that came about was, here I was a man in my 50s, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I was a man in my 50s who had no idea what his heritage was, where we came from, how we got here, or when, or why. and I guess as I got older, I talked about it more. And then Mary, had always talked a lot about her roots. And so I think she maybe got, and I talk about this in my first book, in the author's notes, I think she kind of reached a point where she was tired of hearing it, and she is an incredible researcher. She can deep dive with the best of them. And so I was rambling on one evening, and I thought she was just kind of blowing me off because she was tired of hearing it. And when in fact, she had been researching our family tree. Mm. And she turns to me and she says, she shows me her phone. And I'm like, holy shit. And that was when I started learning about Robert de Bruce and our connection with the Scottish and Irish royal families, Edward de Bruce, Robert de Bruce, and all that goes with that. And then, then that kind of just led me down the rabbit hole to other members of our family from our past, our ancestors. And again, I've always been a history buff. I mean, even in college, I took, 2 honors history classes because I loved it so much. But I found myself taking what she had shared with me and then running with it and just jumping into the rabbit hole feet first. And when I did, I learned so much that, again, and I think I mentioned this before, I would have been remiss had I not taken the time to try to put it into a story and take all the data, all the facts, all the real people and events surrounding them at that time in that era, and then filling in the gaps, if you will, with the rest in order to create what I hope is a palatable story that is at least interesting enough, if for no one else, for you, your siblings, and your hopefully your children and your nephews, so that they can learn about our family and learn things about our family that took me over 50 years to learn. And so that they don't have to grow up with that same void that we spoke about that you and I grew up with, in our lives. And I just really thought that was important. So honestly, I pretty much had an idea of how I wanted to approach it and what direction I wanted to go. Once I had all the historical information in front of me, it kind of laid itself out for me. And then, more research led to more information, which ultimately leads to, the story itself. And what I found most enjoyable was taking the factual and merging it with, the imaginary, if you will. Because, none of us were there. We don't know what was said or in what tone or how or in a way. So that became a real fun exercise for me. And then I found myself, for example, asking myself the questions like, okay, I know what William Bruce Albin, I know William Bruce, his name, his birth date, where he lived, his wife, his kids, I know about his like anything legal, like to do with how he purchased land and how he lost land and how he got new land and all that. I mean, that's all documented, right? But it's the filling in the blanks part that was so much fun, because I'm looking at William and I'm going, okay, so here's a guy who jumps on a ship after his family's house burns to the ground. His grandfather, his father, his mother, and his brother all die in this fire. And his uncle and his sister, little sister and little brother survive. And after the fire, they lose everything and they end up on a ship and they come to the colonies of America. And so I'm thinking about this kid who grew up on a farm in Ireland, surrounded by a family, who goes through this horrible event, who kind of grows as a result, then gets on a friggin' ship and takes this treacherous trip across, the Atlantic Ocean in 1723, for crying out loud. Not exactly the most modern of transportation back then. And then getting to America and finding himself in a new land, and then going and blazing new trails on land that few other white men had ever touched before your great grandfather walked on that land. And I mean, he was truly a trailblazing pioneer of the early Virginians, which is an incredible, integral part of our nation's history. Had it not been for Virginians, we would still be England. I can tell you that right now. Monroe, Jefferson, Washington, and William Albin and his 5 sons. So for me, that was a bit of a challenge, looking at him and saying, with all that being said, what was he like? And try to piece it together from his early beginnings when life was great and he was surrounded by his family, his grandparents. They had a big, huge farm and estate in Ireland, and growing up in the country like that, and hunting on your own land, and living off of the land, and all that goes with that. And then going through all the turmoil and trials and tribulations, and really trying to discern, if you will, what then did William look like? What was his personality like? How did he approach life, as a result of his life experience? And then what I did was I thought, well, what better way to do that than to look at his descendants? And so, for example, your brother Mike is a huge hunter. He might as well be Daniel Boone. He hunts so much, and he's good at it, and he enjoys it. So taking little pieces of what I would consider to be, slices of Michael and his personality, and then slices of you, and then slices of my own father and grandfather, and trying to kind of take those little pieces and put them together to create William Bruce and again the other characters, in the book. And then like his wife, our great grandmother, Mary Elizabeth, and this is a woman who came from Scottish royalty and now lives on the frontier of the Shenandoah Valley in a friggin' cabin. Okay. And so that's quite a swing as well, right? And asking oneself, what was she like? She had been raised to be royalty. She had been raised in a city environment, completely different from where she now finds herself, married to our grandfather, and figured out what she was like, and taking like pieces of your mother. Now, your mother, as you found out, she's Scottish, okay, which makes you and your brother very Scottish and very Irish, in your blood. So, me being of both Irish and Scottish descent. And so anyway, taking a little bit of her personality, and then a little bit of my current wife, Mary's personality, because, she's Irish descent, Irish Belgian descent, and smart, tough, strong, intelligent woman, right? Very independent, very driven, and integrating that into it. And what's interesting is that our great grandmother's name was Mary Elizabeth Albin. She was her maiden name was Bruce, Mary Elizabeth Bruce Albin. So Mary Elizabeth Albin is also the name of my wife today, whose name is Mary Elizabeth Albin. So it's just kind of like God has a plan, right? And so again, as a storyteller, trying to tap into those people that you know, if you will, and again, just kind of taking little pieces of them that fit in with the character that you believe this individual is, and then applying it and wrapping a story around it once you have established that. And I have to say, and appropriately so, I think the characters all grow as the story progresses, as do we all as we walk through life. So each of those characters, you will find if you listen to the books, they start off, over here, and they kind of evolve into what they have ultimately become. Not too far removed from who they always were, but older and wiser, um, and, having experienced a little bit more life. And so that, for me as a storyteller, a first-time storyteller, really, because again, this being my first series of books, was just a joy and was quite a fun and challenging exercise, if you will, in writing. And what's really interesting, you asked about the storytelling, is because I just took this thing and I started running with it, and eventually realized that this wasn't going to just be one novel. This was going to be a series of novels that tells the stories of not only our Williams family in Ireland and before Ireland, going back to our earliest roots, in Scotland with the MacAlpin clan, but then also all of his children as well, and so it has turned into a 4-book series, and the thing that I found very interesting is, so I wrote the 4 books, and I couldn't afford an editor, so I had to try and edit them myself, because this is a project I'm doing on the skinny with 0 budget. So it's been a real learning experience, learning process, like getting a master's in writing, if you will, catching my own mistakes grammatically and otherwise. But the storytelling itself has also evolved. And it's funny because, so I wrote the 4 books, and then I decided, and we discussed this at the time, I wasn't going to try to get published. Nobody knows me from Adam. I just want to share the story of William Bruce, my 7th great grandfather, and everything that, before and after, at least up through into like, the Revolution, our earliest roots, if you will. And so, I wrote and the first book, and then I kept writing, and then the second book, and at which point I started like, oh, you know what? I think I'll end the first book here, then the second book, and then so on, until I had all 4 books in the series completed. And then I went back, and it was like 2 years since I had written the very first book. And so it was my first time looking at it in 2 years, having originally written it. And you kind of touched on this when I first started. He goes, you said, just start writing and you'll find your own voice and you'll develop your own style. Now, I can't say that I've done that yet. I don't know, because no one's ever really read or listened to my books. The first one's out there, but very few have read it or listened to it. And I've gotten 0 input on them. But that being said, when I went back to the first book the first time and read through it, I printed it up and I sent a copy to your sister and you and one other reader, my first readers. And I remember the one first reader said, "Oh, I love the story. It's a great story, And she's a rather avid reader, so she really said she really enjoyed it, and gave me some positive and negative feedback. And I'll never forget what you said. You said, "Dad, this is really nice, and it's great for the family, but I don't think it's ever going to go anywhere." And I was like, "Okay, that's cool." Yeah, and I was like, I was okay with it because I didn't write it to make money. I wrote it to share with you and you kids and the grandkids, right? So I was okay with it. But I really appreciated your honest feedback. I mean, and that also wasn't just about the book. It was about you feeling comfortable enough to be honest with me and say, you know what, this is how I feel. And that was it. So well, then your sister, she gets me on the phone and she says, okay, I read it. I love the story. I freaking love the characters. But the first 10 chapters have to go in the trash. True story. And again, it really speaks to our relationship, that we can be honest with each other, even about something that, might be painful, right? And just say it like it is and trust that, hey, the love's always going to be there and it's all good, And I was counting on that. And so when I got you guys' feedback, I was like, okay. I went back and I took a second look. And I was like, you know what? They're both right, And so I took the first 10 chapters, and your sister's biggest complaint, and it was a very valid point, was that the main character, who the book's named after, William Bruce, didn't make an appearance until the 11th chapter. She's like, I'm reading this fucking book, and the main character's not even in it. What the hell, How long do I got to read before I find out who this motherfucker is, And so I'm like, oh shit. Again, like I said, I had just started writing, and that was it. And I kept writing, and then now I'm going back. I'm like, okay, I think I've got this book, and I'm ready to start recording and maybe put it in an audiobook form. And I printed it. I gave it to you guys. I got the feedback. I looked at it and I went, oh shit, you guys were right. Right. And so I then turned around and I took those first 10 chapters, which essentially is the prologue, condensed way down. And what it was that the first 10 chapters told the backstory of William Bruce.
Right.
And a good portion of which then became the fourth book, which is a prequel to William Bruce. And that's Senior. Now, Senior, you may have heard him talk a time or two, but I'm telling you now, that old bastard, well, he's got quite the story to tell. Aye, indeed he do. So I took those chapters and I rolled them into a fourth book, which is the prequel, but I extracted from it enough information to essentially to set the tone, set the table, if you will, for people coming into William Bruce's story, so that it wasn't cold turkey. Just a light introduction, if you will, to those characters like Senior, who were in fact a part of William's life, right? So giving that brief introduction and then off with William's story. And so I completely wrote the second book, essentially, and or the first book rather, essentially from scratch. And I took the foundation, if you will, the bones of it, and then I just redid it and enhanced it, because what I had learned also was that by the time I had gotten done with writing the third book, I had kind of developed a voice and a style at that juncture that I was now not seeing in my first offering. And so it was really kind of neat being able to look at my work a couple years removed from it and having continued to write and grow as a storyteller, and then go back and look those 2 years later and look at it and go, oh shit, but now knowing what I know now, and I am by no stretch, by no means a novelist, but just maybe a little better at writing, doing what I'm doing, whatever you want to call it, amateur writer or whatever. But so I applied what I had learned and developed and nurtured, and I rewrote the first book. and after I was done, I felt pretty good about it. So the storytelling is my favorite part. My second favorite part is the narration. Because again, I'm doing this on the cheap, so I have to do all my own narrating. I can't afford to hire a voiceover artist or someone to edit it or do any of that. So I do everything myself, soup to nuts, and I love doing that. It's so much. It's just so much fun because I read the book, I narrate the book with each character having their own voice. Men, women, whoever, and just to try to breathe a little more life into the characters, and also to give it a bit of separation and to avoid the monotone, and just again, I know I said already, but really to breathe life into the story with these different folks talking differently and whatnot. So there you go. That's what I've been doing, and and so and here's the thing too, and the whole process started all over again when I was done recording the first novel, because the second novel, I can tell you, is, I think, worlds apart from the first one. The first one's a decent story. It's not bad. The narration isn't bad. But I can tell you, I sit and listen to it and I point to things. I would do that different. I would do that different. I didn't give the reader enough, or the reader or listener enough credit here. I'm overstepping here. I'm beating a dead horse on that, or whatever. And I think as a first-time writer, especially with the first novel, my tendency was to try to overwrite it, if you will. And so, and even when I went back and rewrote it the next time, it was much better. But then the narration itself, I could have done a whole lot better and more along the lines of the technical end of things, because the quality of the recordings wasn't what I had hoped it would be. Not terrible, but not as good as I had hoped. But then, so now I find myself in the middle of book 2. I'm getting ready I'm flying to Atlanta tomorrow for the weekend. And then when I come back on Monday, I'll be recording chapter 16. So, but I'm having an absolute ball. I'm having more fun than you should be allowed to have, honestly, because I've got all of these characters, you see, and they'll be talking to each other to the left and to the right. Oh, and then the little lady comes along and she wishes to say something too. Don't you dare do it now. I'll catch you. I'm going to find you. It's just fun. It's like living in an imaginary world while completing this project. So, and I really find myself pouring my heart and soul into it. And if it wasn't this much fun, I don't think I would. But it is a ton of fun. And I can't wait to finish this book. I would hope to already have it out, but now I'm really just hoping to have it out by Veterans Day, this year, November 11th, book 2. But yeah, so the storytelling, I love it. Absolutely wonderful experience. And for anyone who loves to write or have thought about writing, I say just pick up a pen and paper, sit on a computer, a laptop, whatever, and just do it. Just do it. And the more you do it, the better you get at everything. You really,
That's awesome. I'm so happy you're doing it. I need to actually commit to listening to the thing, because I really want to know the story. I just haven't. I got excuses, whatever. But I just haven't got.
Hey, my own wife hasn't even listened to it. Honestly, the only ones that I know that even read the book cover to cover are Shorty, your sister, and my other first reader. And the thing is, those books aren't even the same books,
right,
that book 1 is today, because I took their feedback and I rewrote it. So I may be the only person that I personally know who's listened to book 1 all the way through. And that's okay. Now, I have it on 8 platforms, and it's gotten some views, but like less than 100, but I don't have a way of marketing it or pushing it. So I throw it out there. And I'm not really worried about that, because again, I wrote it for you guys and for the grandkids.
I think it's awesome. I love how you're talking about like discovering the writer within you, and like in that you discover how to trust the reader and how to and I love that you have the tenacity to do the follow through on all of it. Like when I think about writing 4 books, and personally, I feel like that makes me want to pass out thinking about that. But
well, I've been at it for quite a few years now, as you know, and I remember a conversation we had a while back when I was already I was passing my 5-year mark on this project, because I started in 2017, so it's been 7 years now. And I remember you saying, "Has it been 5 years? Man, I can't believe you stuck with it that long," because it is a real commitment. But it's been a really slow process because a lot of it started out. I wasn't writing; I was researching.
Yeah.
And digging and taking those notes and collecting all that data. And I really had to tap into my college experience with regard, because I used to write these papers for these historical these honors history classes I took, and it was all about writing in those classes. So taking what I extrapolated from that and then applying it to this process and gathering all that data long before and that was fun, mind you, because it was fascinating uncovering all these wonderful historical items about our family, these stories and this data, and so I did that for a while before I even got to the point where I could start to write, and then a whole new world opened up at that point. So at first it was just I was a researcher with ideas going through my head, but then when I actually got to the point where I had enough that I felt it was time to actually write the story, then a whole new chapter opened up and began. And then it's been like that ever since, writing and the books, and then rewriting the books, and then narrating them, and then learning from that element of it, so you got the research and you got the writing. Now I got the actual storytelling, the narration of the story itself. And it's just been a fascinating, amazing experience and growth and learning about myself and the world around me and my heritage and this whole process of bringing a story to life, if you will. Just truly fascinating. And I'll be honest with you, again, because the second book was still written long before the third book was written. So as I go through every chapter before I sit down to do the narration. And having done so much narration now, I know what flows better, right? Or what the proper rhythm is. And we talked about this early on when I first started writing. And not until really, when you're writing it and you're saying it in your head, it's one thing. But then speaking the words aloud takes on a whole different meaning, right? I mean, what I've learned is that what I thought in my mind's eye as I wrote it would flow and sound a certain way did not. And so as I've gone through this second book, I have changed things up as I've gone to mirror what you'll find in the third and fourth books, especially the third book, which was the last one I wrote right before starting this process. So, so I've kind of changed things up, and I think because I've become a little better storyteller, hopefully, I've also seen things throughout different parts of book 2 where I looked at it and said to myself, oh, I should have talked about this right here, because it really relates to the characters. Or sometimes it's just little things that tell the bigger story about each of the characters, right? Little things, you don't want, you're not really going to tell your reader or listener all there is to know about any character in one paragraph. You're going to introduce them, but then the real molding and shaping of that character comes through later as the character walks through the book, and you have all these little moments where you have to seize those moments and say, this is his moment, or this is her moment, and this is how I think they would have responded to it, and so just enhancing the story in ways that I maybe didn't think about when I was just blazing through the first write. And in the process of doing so, I think, again, this second book is so much better. I mean, it is a fun tale. I think, if you ever like Daniel Boone, or Last of the Mohicans, or The Outlander, even that new TV show that's out right now, it's really parallel with those types of stories that you'll find on those shows. And because it really takes place during the same era, and it's just kind of crazy, but yeah, I've really had a good time with it.
What are some of the like the most shocking or like coolest things that you tripped over, like let's say in your historical research? Mm-hmm.
Well, oh man, where do I start? Well, for starters, learning that we're descendants of Edward de Bruce, King of Ireland, who was the brother of Robert de Bruce, King of Scotland, the same Robert de Bruce that people will recall appeared in the movie Braveheart, and also the movie Robert de Bruce. And learning about that and all that goes with it, learning that we also descended from the MacAlpin clan, which is the first royal family, royal clan of Scotland, and who actually, King MacAlpin actually created Scotia, which is now Scotland today. Learning of our connection to that, and knowing that we're Clan MacAlpin, which is really kind of cool. Did you know that we're a member? Our family has a clan, so that's kind of cool. But then even just for me, a lot of little things, watching the progression of the family move from Scotland to England to Ireland, and then ultimately to the colonies of North America, the British colonies of North America in 1723, and then the story that follows. But one really big thing that I think you are the one that discovered this for me, and that was the story about, or maybe I found out about, William's son George served as one of George Washington's personal bodyguards during the Revolutionary War. Mm-hmm. And I believe after I shared that with you, shortly thereafter, you reached out to me. I think you got intrigued by that, became intrigued by that, and did your own digging. And I'll never forget you reaching out to me and going, Dad, yeah, but there's documents here that say that he was court-martialed and received 100 lashes, right? Well, you got to read the book to find out what led up to that and why and what the outcome was. Because George was actually honored by George Washington after the war and given his due just deserts as a veteran, an honored veteran following the Revolution. And in George Washington, that was another thing. We had a personal connection with George Washington. William had his interaction with Washington during his early days, during the 1750s, when Washington served as colonel of the Virginia Regiment in Winchester, Virginia, which, as it happens, was just 5 or so miles away from Albin Village, which was where your grandfather's farm was and where they lived. And so he had his interaction with Washington. His son, John, his oldest son, actually went on to serve with Washington during that period, or right around that period, and served with Washington in the French and Indian War, during the mid 1750s. And then John's connection with Washington and these other individuals like Daniel Boone.
Wow.
During the Battle of Fort Duquesne, in which Washington came out the hero, and the general that was in command ended up dying, along with all but 8 of the officers and half of the men. So it's really quite fascinating, our connection with history and with historical people. So John served, and then ultimately, and again, to get the details, you have to wait for the second book to come out, because actually the third book to come out, because this part's it doesn't come into play until the third book. But eventually, all of our grandfather's sons, John, Robert, William Jr., James, and George, and by the way, George was named after George Washington, and was the same young lad who grew up to be George Washington's personal bodyguard later in life during the Revolution. As a result of William's interaction with Washington during his time in Winchester. So really finding that out was mind-blowing. And then finding out what happened and why and all that was mind-blowing. So there have been a lot of little moments like that. Learning about how one of the brothers, for example, was taken prisoner of war, taken captive aboard. I forget the name of it. It was the most infamous prisoner ship during the Revolution, and most of the prisoners on that ship did not live to see the light of day again. They perished on board. The conditions were so bad, but he did survive. And then the other brother, John, the oldest brother, was a non-commissioned officer. He was a sergeant, and then 2 of his brothers were lieutenants, actual officers, and the other one was just private. So all 5 brothers served under Washington during the American Revolutionary War. The 2 oldest brothers, Robert and John, were at the Battle of Trenton when Washington crossed the Delaware.
Wow.
These are some of the most historic moments in our nation's history, and they were there, they fought, and they survived. And so, it just things like that, especially being, a history buff like I am, learning that, wow, these things that I've been reading about my whole life, these events that I've read about in history books, we're connected. Our family is connected to that, and knowing that we played a role in freeing this nation and providing it its independence as a nation, and helping us to become who we are today, and the sacrifices that went with that. So things like that, I found extraordinarily fascinating.
That is wild.
Yeah.
That is absolutely wild. Wow. Well, I love you, Pops. Thanks for coming and sharing the story. It's probably about almost 10 o'clock my time. I think.
Well, we're both on the same time, and it's 20 after 9. So we've been on almost 4 hours.
Yeah,
but
no,
hey,
awesome.
I want to thank you, because I've really enjoyed sharing this stuff with you, and I hope I didn't, I hope I didn't bore your audience too much.
They loved it.
But truly enjoy, and if you ever want to do it again, give me a holler. We can talk about something else.
Absolutely. No, it's really great. And if you want to tell us the name of your channel and where they might be able to find you, and maybe also if you want to send me the information, I'll put it in the show.
I would love to do that. Sure. I am on YouTube at Sergeant TJ Albin, the Closet Writer, and I'm sure Chad will include the link below. But then I'm also on Rumble and Instagram and Getter and Truth and X and Facebook. And, I started presenting this, my books last year on November 11th, which is Veterans Day, last Veterans Day. So that's when I started out at this. And I'm really pleased. I mean, I'm just shy of like 10,000 subscribers across the 7 platforms and having a blast. And I just hope everyone will take time to if you enjoy a good book like the one I described, a good story, um, the full first volume of The Adventures of William Bruce can be found on my YouTube page. It's in a playlist in order, easy to follow. Give it a listen. And then please share your thoughts, share your feedback. I love that. I mean, if my kids can tell me to shit can the first 10 chapters, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can say to hurt my feelings.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I'll email or text you rather the information for YouTube is probably the best place to find me. I think that they have the best quality and the easiest way to find the whole book and listen to it soup to nuts, beginning to end. So, and then like I say, the second book will hopefully be out by November. So.
And if somebody wants to contact you to talk with you, you want to give your email?
Sure. It's Sergeant. It's sgt.t.j.albin at gmail.com. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us my first interview? I can't even remember my own freaking email.
Oh, this is great. No,
but maybe you can include that in your description too, if you want. If people want to reach out and ask questions or whatever, I would love to interact with people. In between. And I know we're looking to cut this to end this soiree of ours, but I will say this: in the time that since I released the first book until now, I've had to be able to produce viable content for people to keep them coming to my channels, because all I had to offer was the first book, right? So I've been doing these workout videos, and that has really grown my presence on these platforms. And so that the interaction that I've had with that has been absolutely amazing, because I get people all ages, older than me, younger than me, same age as me, talking about, seeing an old dude doing a workout videos, exercising in front of a camera, in front of the world. They're just so inspired. And I've got these people telling me, now I'm working out with you. Oh, I went and got my yoga mats out, and I do your videos with you. So I can't wait till the next one comes out. And people, lending advice. Hey, on that particular move, try this, or you might want to work on this or whatever. But the relationship with these amazing and frankly perfect strangers has been so incredible and so rewarding. And I mean, I call them my friends, because many of them I talk to on a daily basis, because they comment and interact with such frequency. And I do answer every single comment on every single platform. And I know it takes me a ton of time, because I do get a ton of feedback. Not on my book, unfortunately, on the workout videos. I would love to hear your feedback on the book. Hey, by the way, there's a book on there. But yeah, if I had that kind of interaction that I've had with my 60 for 60 challenge, which is what I call my workout videos, Sergeant TJ would be a happy camper. I mean, it'd probably be a #1 bestseller. But nobody knows it's there, and that's the whole thing. It's about exposure. And honestly, I'm okay with that, because again, I think the second book's going to be that much better. And when that one comes out, that's going to be, I think, something that people are really going to enjoy jumping into. First one's good. First one's okay. It's not bad for a first offering. But I'm telling you now, the second one is. It's just better. And I'm excited to finish it. I can't wait to finish it. So. Anyway, hey, I love you. Thank you so much for this time shared with you. I look forward to it. I hope we can do it again. Truly been a pleasure. And thank you.
This has been a great pleasure and an honor. I mean, I think it's been such a great story. Thank you for sharing all that with us. And
it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it won't be the last time. So hang on a minute. We'll talk backstage. And I want us to say Say bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. I'll be seeing you later, folks. And look for me in my next book. That's right. I'll be there.
Perhaps all of this builds up to the idea of maybe perhaps having all of human history be about you. The ultimate narcissistic dream that the entire, not only the entire world that I'm living in, but all of human history might be about me.
The theosis idea, such that you're in communion with reality as it's supposed to be, and you're it's no longer I that live, but Christ that lives in me. And so that thing in itself, it's almost, I guess the way I see it is like there's the thing in itself, and then there's all of us and our various positioning or posturing in relation to that thing. And based on that is where we get the kind of historical overlay of what Christianity comes to be. And because it's so vast and because it's so significant, we get this massive confusion because there's just like the number of postures held in relation to this thing bleeds out this historical framework that is just, and cultural framework that's very, very like bizarre and confusing.
I think the quest for the thing in itself is analogous to what I've called a monarchical vision. We want, and I think it's sort of sneakily, once again, an attempt to distill Christianity or almost anything else into the propositional. You will never, I do not think our little brains or even our little traditions can capture the thing in itself. And that's I think that's recognized by various theological statements that are both Protestant and Orthodox or Roman Catholic. When we talk about God not being knowable, it doesn't mean that we can't know anything, but we cannot contain God. And so every time we have this quest for the thing in itself, that's just to me another version of the same game of propositional capturing, and I think the motivation for that is if we think we can capture, well, how would we capture? Probably propositionally within an abstracted box. If we think we can capture the thing in itself, then we can wield it. And I think fundamental to Christianity and fundamental to anything that is not idolatrous is it cannot be wielded. You cannot wield God. And I think idolatry is fundamentally the attempt to wield God through a statue, through a practice, through a set of propositional beliefs. If I do these things, then it's idolatrous because we then want to replace God. And fundamentally, the posture you need to have towards God is not idolatrous. It is, I can't even know my wife in herself, or my children in herself, or my church in itself. And so to sort of say, well, I want to really define Christianity in itself, that's nothing you are capable of by virtue of who you are.
Yes, absolutely. Because, that's the move of original sin already, right?
The one and the many. Desperately clinging and clamoring for connection. Repelled by suspicion and perspective, compelled by a silence. Advent of ancient seismic subconscious tectonic, trying to whisper warnings and wisdom in the ears of infants. In the beginning there was the Word. In the end, a city by the oceanless sea. Ever wonder what would happen if death was removed from the home, only after given a place to call home? Only after the desert was given as refuge to the slave? Only after the slave left home? Let's face it, we're characterized by running from something. Call it life, call it death. Are we running away or running to stay? One of many ways. Pontificate on position and play. Edify comforts. Cling again to a hope that we might have to look. Cosmic peekaboo. Desperate for a God, insistent that God be the true God. In the beginning was the Word. Watch me write them. Hear me sing. Muddle along with me. All along, begging, lying, cursing, pleading. God gave us a voice, and we speak as if we were gods. And on the ground, the gods are warring for the perfect sound, to hear themselves speak, but not to listen to sound.
The art of knowing is no simple thing.
Whoa.
Wow.
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 Wow.